Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching second and final part of What If Naruto Had a Harem with Ino and Yakumo. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Naruto stepped forward and said, "I believe that you were, pardon my use of words, Hokage Sama, mistaken when you turned her down." The people in the room gave him even more shocked looks. Gaki's got a big brass pair to say that. I planned a coup, but damn to say it to his face. With good reason. Konoha is renowned for the incredible emphasis we place on the idea of teamwork. Even Hanzo the Salamander respected the Sannin, who were among our strongest ninjas to this day. They were formidable on their own, but when they worked together, they were feared throughout the country. I'm trying to say that you will be betraying the very principles we uphold if you refuse to have another of the 5 great villages as an ally. Sarutobi laughed and shook his head, saying, "My boy, you would make a great politician." He turned to face an optimistic Mei and said, "I will allot you as much as my village can offer in the Department of Resources as well as man power." At this point, Mei's face lit up with a broad smile, and she smothered Naruto into her cleavage, suffocating the fortunate bastard. Mei dropped a gasping Naruto to the ground and said, "You must submit to 2 requests." She bowed and said, "Anything in my power, Hokage Sama." As Naruto was slowly attempting to slip out, puzzled expressions appeared on everyone's faces. "You must come and talk a treaty with me when you have stabilized your village, and you must take a certain ninja. You must take Naruto as an overseer and ambassador of sorts," the Sandaime said. One of the people in the room turned to see Naruto as he stepped onto the Hokage's balcony railing. His final word was, "Fuck," and he jumped out into the village, where he was chased by a quarreling group of rather powerful kunoichi, while his tenant urged him to flee the sluts who don't deserve to touch my mate. The Hokage, Kakashi, and Zabuza all laughed. Hiruzen grinned as he turned to face the picture of Minato and his wife. "You'd be proud of the man your boy has become." "I know I am. Someday his legend may just overshadow even your own Minato, but that's how it works, right? The younger generation is always meant to surpass the past generation." "My dear, you've been sorely missed. What could our favorite blonde be yelling about in such a manner? If you have to ask, you really don't know Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze that well," our blonde protagonist exclaimed in ecstasy, while the females vying for his attention only wished they could make him half as happy as that. "We discover him at Ichiraku Ramen, his version of the happiest place on earth. I have nothing to do with Disney. Don't sue me, Mr. Mouse." The females there, including Ayame, were unable to contain their laughter at his response to the noodles. "Oh savior. Kun," Mei's seductive voice sang, and as he turned to face her, he spat out whatever noodles he was eating because of the image in front of him. Mei had yet to return his cloak, and she was using it to flaunt her amazing cups by dangling the noodles just above them. If it weren't for a tap on the shoulder, he would have fallen for her seductive ways. He turned to face Yakumo, who was making the most of her cute factor by offering Naruto her own noodles and pouting like a kicked puppy while managing to keep her beauty. "Why don't you try some of my noodles, Naru-kun?" If he hadn't felt a pair of rather nice, almost circa cups pressed against his back, he would have fallen for this too. Craning his neck around, he discovered his fellow blonde slurping up noodles in the most sexy way possible, and she gave him a wink before giving him a noodle and letting him see her cleavage. He was interrupted once more by someone settling into his lap, and as he looked down, his vision was obscured by raven black hair, but he felt a hand guide his face down to savor some of Haku's delectable noodles. He had just opened his mouth to savor that little bit of heaven when the girls started fighting over whose noodles their crush would eat. The blonde could only give a face, and since he didn't want to get into a fight he would lose, he resigned himself to eating his own bowl. To his utmost annoyance, however, this was also taken away from him when the Uzumaki Harem, a hilarious dust storm of limbs, knocked against the table just as he had dipped his chopsticks in. The bowl appeared to fall in slow motion, taking several minutes to hit the floor before breaking and spilling its contents. The small stand was silent, with everyone too terrified to breathe or set off the time bomb that was Naruto's ramen deprived diet. The wrath of something so legendary in the village that even bystanders had frozen to avoid provoking the ramen addict's wrath, and even the local wildlife had fled the scene, sensing the impending disaster. The Sandaime in the Hokage's office looked up, shook his head, and prayed for the unfortunate person who had tampered with Naruto's ramen. The man known throughout the world as the most brutal and horrifying interrogator, Morino Ibiki, shuddered deep underground in the T&I, torture and interrogation, department. Yes, even a man who seemed so fearless trembled in fear. No matter how far away they were or what they were doing, every Jinchuriki in the world looked in the direction of Konoha because they could feel the intensity of their brother's rage. Even the emotionless Gaara shuddered in terror as his mother's cries changed from yelling for blood to silent requests for forgiveness. The strong and attractive Kyuubi inside Naruto was caught between cowering in terror and being incredibly aroused by her container's rage, so she decided to do both at once. Ever so slowly Naruto's form began to turn on his stool to face the girls, his eyes shadowed by his bangs. The girls immediately hit the floor prostrating themselves as if they had angered a god and not their crush. Naruto muttered a small, "We need to talk," that echoed throughout the extremely quiet village, and soon he and the girls were gone. As soon as his form left the stand, it seemed as if the whole world breathed a sigh of relief. The girls found themselves in a beautiful garden with Naruto standing only feet away. They immediately began to apologize and thinking of ways to show just how sorry they were. Most of these thoughts almost instantly went straight into the gutter, involving handcuffs and in some cases a whip or a ball-dog gag. Cough Haku cough Yaku Moko. All the Uzumaki could do was sweat drop as the girls started to drool and get a glazed look in their eyes. It got even worse, better, yea better, as he heard the voice of his tenant, "And punish your Q-chan for being bad. Goddamn it, not you too." Sighing, Naruto flared his chakra, which had two effects. Yes, it served the purpose of getting their attention, but due to where their minds had been before, it made some of the girls become very sticky in their no bits. Coughing into his hand he spoke, "Girls, we need to get this worked out. As much as I enjoy having possibly some of the hottest girls in the nations fighting over me, it's got to stop." Ino took advantage of this, and wrapping her arms around her crushes she stuck her tongue out and said, "Yay, he picks me, so the rest of you get out of here." Right as the girls opened their mouth to voice their opinions on that, Naruto spoke up, "Girls. That's what I'm talking about. I thought I would eventually be able to choose just one of you, but each of you holds my interest, in some cases my heart, for different reasons." Releasing his arm out of Ino's vice grip and turning to the Genjutsu mistress, he continued, "Yakumo, you were the first actual friend I made in this hellhole. You helped me through a lot, and you've just got this charm to you that I can't resist. I need you to keep me calm." Leaving a blushing brunette, he turned to the Yamanaka. "Ino, you were the second person to become my friend, and you've also helped me through some stuff. I find you so beautiful it's crazy, but you're also really bossy, but that's good. I need you to keep me in line." He turned away from the obstinately flushed blonde and turned to face the Yuki heiress. "Haku, I've only known you for a few days, but we have such a similar past that it can be frightening at times," he said. "Every day, your stunning porcelain face continues to pierce my heart. I need you to make my past less painful." When Haku turned to face the Kiri rebel leader, he blushed and said, "May, I've only known you for maybe 2 days at most, and I can't say that you're special to me." When the redhead lowered her head, he said, "But," and Naruto raised it, making her meet his eyes. "I know in time you will be," he said. "In the brief time I've known you, I can't fathom my life without you." He inhaled and went on, "I guess we should give the Shoden credit for creating the CRA, huh? I asked some very powerful kunoichi if they were willing to share me," he said, smiling nervously. This could go really well or really badly for him. While the girls, including Mei, were aware of his Jinchuriki status, they were unaware that his Biju was female and competing for his affections. "You know Naruto-kun, if they turn you down you always have me," Naruto said, going into panic mode once more. "Well, before you ladies speak," he said, "I think there's someone you should know about," but all he got in return were blank stares. "You are all aware of my hazy little issue, aren't you?" They both nodded with identical expressions. He sighed at their bewildered looks and said, "Well, it turns out she's a girl and she wants to be my mate. Maybe it would be better if I showed you what I meant." Naruto did a sealess cage bunshin, then reached down to his shirt and lifted it up, showing the already swooning girls his hardened abs. He had a number of scars from his life, but they only made the blonde's hotness rating higher. At this point, Naruto had closed his eyes and was perspiring because he had to be very careful with what he was doing. If he allowed too little or too much of one of the different energies to flow in his arm, let's just say he would have to start using only one-handed seals from now on. However, he was able to concentrate his chakra and make the Hake no Fuin Shiki, 8 trigrams seal, clearly visible on his navel. After some experimentation, he discovered that the 3 energies appeared to follow a pattern. His Uzumaki and Namikaze energies could mix without causing any negative effects. In fact, the result of using both was amazing. He was able to create matter and even energy itself while doing so, as well as destroy it on a cellular level, which defied the laws of physics, but it made sense. The Namikaze chakra was the power of manipulation, enabling him to manipulate anything and everything. Uzumaki chakra dealt with matter, its creation and destruction, and combining the two brought him dangerously close to godhood, which is why he had come to refer to this as transcendence. Yes, I took it from Bleach. He received another surprise when he combined Uzumaki and Yoki in any way. He was able to use nature chakra in its purest form, which allowed him to control all the elements in their most basic forms and increase his physical prowess to previously unheard of levels, even by ninja standards. This was, of course, Sage Mode. But he still had shortcomings. He was unable to use any jutsu that involved the elements when he entered Transcendence, and he surmised that this was because of his physical and spiritual limitations as a human, which caused his body to sacrifice its connection to nature in order to enter this transcendent state. Similarly, he was unable to use any Jikukan jutsu when he was in Sage Mode. He was obviously very difficult to kill in either state, but it was much simpler than when he let all three energies flow through him naturally. This was because the two modes deactivated, the other when he entered them, which also meant that his healing factor was weakened. The concentration required to call upon these states was another disadvantage. It took him at least a minute and a half to enter the states, and in the Nin world, that brief window could have meant the difference between his life and the lives of those he was defending. Following the success of combining Uzumaki energy with the other energy sources, he attempted to do the same with Namikaze and Yoki energy. However, the outcome was not pleasant. It appeared that the two energies were at odds with one another because of their personality and nature. However, after some consideration, it became clear that this was not the case. The nature of the Namikaze chakra was almost godlike, meaning it was not of this world or nature. In other words, it was not of nature. Yoki, particularly the Yoki he had received from Kyuubi and was transforming into his own, was nature. It was the essence of nature, emotions. As a result, the two clashed and were unable to mix correctly without consequences. Being a stubborn Uzumaki, however, he would not stop there. Through trial and error, he discovered that if the two were balanced to perfect in equal amounts, they would not fight or cancel each other out. Instead, he was gifted with the ability to manipulate life, the elements, and even human emotions. This greatly unsettled Naruto because, as an empath, he realized how important human emotions were to life, and it was disgusting for him to take control of them or even overwrite them with his own. He had vowed to himself that he would never use that power if he could. But when applied to the ninja arts, he discovered that combining the two gave him some incredible power in Nin, Gen, and Fuinjutsu. In Fuinjutsu, it allowed him to reorganize existing seals to his liking and write seals anywhere he wanted, even in the air in front of him. This led to what he was about to do. Using his ability to control seals, he was going to try something he had never done before, bringing the Kyuubi out of her seal and into the real world. When she was first sealed by the Shodem and Mito, her physical body was destroyed, but because he was a huge construct of chakra, he was able to use both her and his own Yoki to create a new one using his Namikaze chakra. In theory, that's how he believed it would operate. His arm literally sank into his stomach as if his body were made of nothing but liquid, and he dug around until he felt what he knew to be the Kyuubi. As he wrapped his hand around her, he heard the girl's gasp as he felt his arm get covered in the two fighting energies. When he felt he had enough, he reached for his seal. "Are you doing what? Quit, please quit, Naruto Yule." A flash of red and the cries of, "Naruto," were the blonde's final sights before his world exploded in agony like never before. When he woke up, he was in his room in the Namikaze clan house, where he had been given the right to live shortly after becoming a genin as his heritage was finally revealed. Half expecting to see the girls around him, Naruto looked up to see a sea of red, but instead he saw a sea of hair that was a very familiar shade of blood red. He thought, I guess it worked after all, but where are the others? They would have told the Hokage and Kakashi what had happened, so where are they all? The owner of the red hair groaned with satisfaction at the pleasant sensation she was experiencing at the moment and tried to cuddle closer to the source of warmth she was hugging. Thinking the Kyuubi's behavior was cute, he reluctantly halted his own activities and shook the Biju, saying, "Sorry Q-chan, but you gotta get up now, I kinda wanna move around now." 5 more minutes Naru.kun, was the only response he gave when he saw a single crimson colored eye emerge from the similarly colored hair and retreat back into his abdomen. Geez. I release the most powerful creature on Earth using dangerous methods, and all said being is worried about is 5 more minutes of nap time. He put his arms around the sobbing woman and rubbed her back in an attempt to calm her, but before he could try to wake her again, the woman's eyes snapped open in realization, and a stunning pair of blood-red eyes stared back into his own baby blues before a sobbing Biju pinned him to the bed. "You baka, idiot," Kyuubi said, raising her head once more to reveal her swollen eyes to Naruto. "What the fuck made you think that was a good idea? Do you have any idea what could have?" Only to be silenced by her container slamming his lips onto hers in a passionate kiss which she quickly melted into, all previous anger and worry replaced by love and passion. True Naruto had only known that Kyuubi was a female for a month now, but he always felt close to the demoness before. She had been one of two people who cared enough to actively try and help him regardless of the repercussions when he was young. In the beginning it had all seemed for the fox's own selfish benefit, but after years of getting to know her personality he knew there was an undertone of care beneath it all. He grew close to her as the fox, creating their bond much before he had even met Yakumo and befriended her. Besides his one-time sensei, Vincent, the Kyuubi had been his only friend and being he could fully trust. Finding out she was female combined with his growing into his hormones had made that bond different. He cared for and liked the other girls of course, but the feelings he had for his tenant were different, deeper. In all honesty he could safely say that what he felt for her was love. Being his first true love and the being that had been with him literally since the beginning, it was only fitting that she was his first kiss. Kyuubi felt much the same. Seeing Naruto triumph over everything life had thrown his way was inspiring to her. She had lived for hundreds of years before she was contained and had met her fair share of powerful individuals. Hell, she was sealed into two, and those two were married to equally powerful individuals. They all had their tragic stories, such was the world they lived in, but Naruto's story? It struck a chord in her, maybe because she was at fault for his lack of parents in a way, or maybe because he reminded her of her father, the Rikudo Sennin. Whatever the reason, she found herself truly drawn to him like no other. Being as beautiful and powerful as she was, she had her fair share of suitors, heck even some of the other Biju had pursued her at one time. But she had turned them down. None of them had what she was looking for. Sure, they were strong, looked good, all of that, but that was it. Naruto? He would one day even topple her in terms of power. He was very attractive and would only age to become even more so, and his aura, his emotions, they were not pure. It was odd to her. His aura was far from pure, but neither was it evil. He seemed to walk the very fine line between the two, in that gray area. It was all of this, the very person that was Naruto Uzumaki. Namales that she had found herself in love with. She had thought they would never work, being that she was an immortal and him immortal, but as his heritage was revealed and just what he would become came to light, that seemed to matter less and less. Now he himself would one day become an immortal on the scale of a god. Any other reason for her thinking it would not work was stupid, and she knew it, so she took her chance. She had made it seem like she just wanted him because he was powerful, but she did so only out of fear of his rejection, but considering the position she was currently in she didn't think he would turn her down. The need for air eventually surfaced and the two parted, staring into the other's eyes. The Kyuubi focused as much of her thought processes as she could, but due to her jumbled state of mind all that came out was, what, why, how, only to be shushed by Naruto's lips meeting hers once more. Before they could lose themselves to the passion once more, the blonde pulled away. Grinning at the beautiful red head in front of him, he chuckled softly and said, "Empath, remember?" The Kyuubi grinned, then began to laugh in her melodious voice. How could I forget? Stopping her laughter and leaning her forehead against Naruto's, she looked him in the eye and asked, "So what now?" "I don't know. I hadn't really planned for any of this to happen the way it did. I didn't know what." "Oh shit. Q," he said as he began to panic. The Kyuubi's eyes shone in worry as she asked, What's wrong?" "The reaction. What caused the backlash?" The blonde, in a panic, said. Kyuubi's turn came now to kiss the blonde to silence her. She pulled away and stroked Naruto's jawline with a neatly manicured finger before exhaling, "Easy there. Relax. Nothing too bad." At his curious glance she motioned for him to sit up. Doing so he found the Kyuubi making herself comfortable on his lap. After doing so she continued, "Well, due to what you did and the properties of the two energies you threw the seal into chaos. Because the Shinigami himself powers the seal, it is in a sense sentient. As such it began to panic when you threw a wrench into its plans. So it did what it thought to be the best solution. And that would be, as I left, the seal only allowed what it deemed to be enough out, keeping about 8 tails of my yoki locked inside it. As such as it stands I only wield 1 tail of my power while the rest has been left to you. Being that there was not a conscience tied to the power, the seal was able to accelerate the rate at which it was working. All in all, this means that instead of 9 tails of yoki being siphoned into you until you were about 19, the process will now end 2 years ahead of schedule, when you turn 17. And does that mean I'll turn into a Hanyu, half-demon, when I'm 17? Nestling her head in the crook of Naruto's shoulders, the demoness hemmed, "That I do not know. Though we are still bonded at the soul, I no longer have such access to your body or mind." The seal made sure of that much. Wrapping his arms around Kyuubi and pulling her in closer, the blonde pondered aloud, "This means that you are now pretty much completely free of the seal, with the small exception that should I die you will to correct?" Feeling the red head nod against his shoulder he continued, then I can only assume that I will become a Hanyu due to our bond and the massive amount of yoki I now wield. You are incorrect, intoned the raspy voice of his ancestor. Then what will happen? I highly doubt that having 8 tails of yoki in a human body would end in any sort of pleasant manner. You have 10 tails of yoki. You had already absorbed 1 full tail of her yoki when you awoke me in your namikaze blood. After your experiment, the seal allotted you another tail so that you did not die. Her yoki regenerates at an alarming pace, and so each tail she lost was regained in days. The seal then took 8 of her 9, meaning that at your current state you have 2 full tails in your own yoki and 8 tails of hers that are currently being turned into your own. But how does any of that mean I won't turn into a Hanyu? With 10 tails there should be no way I could remain human and keep such a massive amount of power without being torn asunder by it. Normally yes, but you and your situation are far from normal. Your body has had yoki, uzumaki, and namikaze energy flowing through it since the day of your conception in your mother's womb. Yes, most of it lay dormant and inaccessible to you, most still does, but it ran through your body nonetheless. Your body has thusly made the proper adjustments to allow your continued existence without backlash. In essence, your body will remain as it is, but more and more uzumaki and namikaze energy will become available to you as her yoki does to keep a balance. What makes you say, as it is, rather than, human? Because you are not human. I am not even sure what you are. No other creature or being in the world has ever had both demon and god and human blood in its veins at the same time. Throughout history, numerous attempts to create a being similar to you have failed, and your existence alone defies logic and all universal laws. I see. Boy, don't take this as a sign of some sort of evil, because it isn't. You are a better man than anyone in your village, a better demon than anyone in hell, and a better god than those who despise us. Never forget who you are and what you stand for, and nothing will change. Power isn't good or bad, it's the intent behind its use that determines its nature. Human chakra can be used to bring death, and yoki can be used to heal. Keep your resolve and never waver or you will fall. As Naruto's eyes changed from their typical sapphire blue to a purple that reminded her of something royal, Kyuubi gazed in wonder. In addition, she sensed that Naruto's very being pulsed with power, sending out waves that were similar to standing on a shore and feeling the little ocean waves lap at your feet. The waves that hit you only licked at your ankles, but you could see how vast and powerful the body they came from was, and that's what she felt from Naruto. With his hands folded behind his back, Sarutobi Hiruzen gazed across the village toward the Namikaze residence from his balcony. He could only smile and weep in silence, realizing that the boy he had helped destroy would grow up to be such a man. He shook his head in regret and went back to work. Standing in front of the memorial stone at Training Ground 7, Kakashi grinned and said, "Your parents would be so proud of you, O Tuto." Everyone in the large village of Konohagakure no Sato felt it. They grinned as waves of power swept past them, bringing with them a feeling of warmth and a determination to defend. Fueled by the winds of the maelstrom, the will of fire burned brightly on the waves formed by the whirlpools. A figure in a familiar black cloak stood atop the Hokage monument, chuckled, and said in a deep voice, "It looks like you've been training. Let's see how much you've developed, my pupil." I agree that this would have been a fantastic way to wrap things up, but I won't do that to you guys, so let's get back to the story. That much power left unchecked and not knowing how to properly use it was idiotic on all levels. Kyuubi agreed that he would need to train even more now after he explained what Yamato had told him. After getting fully dressed, something he asked a blushing Kitsune about, and preparing to go look for the girls, Naruto felt malicious intent directed at Kyuubi. He immediately leapt for her, bringing her to the ground with him, just in time to see an arrow fly through the window and lodge itself inches deep into the wall a mere nanosecond later. "I would not waste my time looking for your girls as they are currently in my very capable hands," Naruto read aloud as they both stood up and examined the arrow, discovering a note inside. "I have to admit that I am envious of the gorgeous women you have." "Beautiful" is an understatement. "I have to admit that I am inclined to try to convince them to accompany me. I would hurry, but you are more than welcome to defend yourself. You can find me in the forest behind the Hokage monument because I don't like to play games." Kyuubi, who may not have liked the girls for attempting to take what was hers, knew Naruto loved them and would assist where she could, so by the time the paper hit the ground, both Naruto and Kyuubi were gone. A few minutes later, we see Naruto, his red-haired demoness, Kakashi, and Zabuza leaping through the Konoha forest's trees, having already passed the monument. The other 2 members of the group joined them after witnessing the 2 speeding through the city and learning about the situation. They still didn't know who Kyuubi was, but they accepted Naruto's response, a good friend. He used his empath sense to sense the girl's anxiety and fear, but there was nothing to go along with it. He knew the person who had abducted them was somewhere, but he was unable to sense him. Naruto landed on a tree and saw the waterfall where he and the others had stopped, and when he looked at the top of it, he saw the girls roped together and hanging over the edge. Before he could take any action, he felt someone appear behind him, and he turned to see someone bind and gag Kyuubi, Kakashi, and Zabuza before they too vanished. By this point, Naruto was furious, but seeing Kyuubi being taken along with them and the terrified expression in her eyes sent him over the edge. He gave in to the anger he felt, and his yoki engulfed him in its fiery embrace. His eyes turned blood red with a black pupil, his nails sharpened, his whiskers darkened, and his teeth sharpened, causing them to protrude from his lip. The tree he stood on withered and turned black under the evil aura. Sensing another presence, he looked up and saw a man standing on an outcropping of rocks halfway up to the waterfall. The man was dressed in a simple black shirt, black pants, and black boots, and his greasy black hair gleamed in the midday's sun against his pale complexion. He had a twisted grin on his face, indicating that he was enjoying the moment, and he had a plain broadsword with a golden handle in his right hand. In an unexpected display of strength, the man pushed against Naruto and threw him into the air with a thrust, and he soon jumped from his perch and raced towards Naruto with a crazy smile on his face. The air around the two rippled from the force of the blow, and soon the ground around the man's feet cratered from the force of the hit. The man's twisted grin changed to one of strain as he brought his sword up to block Naruto's downward strike with his own katana. The two fighting swords clashed once more, sending the air roiling from the pressure. Naruto lost the battle once more and fell to the ground, kicking up a huge cloud of dirt and debris as he hit the ground. The man disappeared before the blonde could catch his breath. Naruto's group watched in horror as the mangled form of Naruto was blown away, revealing that the two had once again connected blades, sending another ripple through the air. His leg was in much the same condition, and his left arm was broken, dangling at an odd angle, and he had suffered a massive head injury, as evidenced by the blood coloring his once golden blonde hair. Naruto sent a pulse of chakra through his body almost instantly, healing what would have been fatal wounds. The man brought his fist to Naruto's face before he could start to form one-handed seals, sending several teeth flying in a nasty crunch that indicated his nose had also been severely broken. Naruto's neck snapped back painfully, and the impact sent him tumbling. The broadsword was stabbed into the ground just centimeters from his head before he could struggle to his feet. The stranger leaned down and whispered into the blonde's ear, "I told you before, anger will blind and bind, didn't I?" With his katana on his shoulder, Naruto shook his head and said, "And I've said it before, you are one sick bastard, Vincent." "Sensei." The stranger walked to the other side of the clearing, calmly standing as Naruto burst out into laughter. The cloak of Yoki faded along with the characteristics it had made. Naruto struggled to his feet and used his katana as a cane before using his chakra to heal his wounds once more. The girls squirmed at the sight of the man, but Naruto waved his hands placatingly and said, "Don't worry girls, he won't do anything to you, I promise." As they undid the cloth around everyone's mouths, Ino shot back, "Oh really? Will we not be harmed by the man who abducted us, then bound and gagged us hundreds of feet above a waterfall?" The man laughed and said, "Hey, I didn't hurt you though." He got a number of angry looks in return. When the girls were eventually set free, they all blomped Naruto, almost suffocating the fortunate bastard. Vincent simply laughed at his student's situation, saying, My, I didn't think I had trained such a ladies' man." Naruto nervously scratched the back of his head after removing himself from the heap of limbs and said, "Yay, wasn't exactly my plan, but it happened." With a serious expression on his face, Vincent put his hand on his student's shoulder and said, "Happens to the best of us, it does, my young Padawan." Naruto gave him a perplexed look, but Vincent laughed again and dismissed him, saying, "Inside joke, kiddo." "So, sensei, why are you here, and why do you have that appearance?" Oops, Vincent's sweat dropped as he looked down at his form. "I completely forgot about that." His body glowed and a completely different person took its place with a wave of his hand. The man they saw now stood at a solid 6 foot and was clothed in what looked to be leather plants with a silver-studded belt on his waist. His feet were covered by a pair of ankle-black boots with silver clasps going up their sides with his pants tucked into them. Covering his abdomen was a black vest with various clasps with silver metal on its front. From the sides were thin silver chains that connected the back and front pieces. He wore nothing underneath and the vest only stopped just above the belt, which left a lot of his tanned skin showing. His arms were also left bare, showing his compact muscles, and various tattoos dotted his arms, some big and some small. His face changed to match his skin color and sharpened into regal features with high cheekbones and a set of piercing purple eyes. His hair fell in layers of black and streaks of red and blue. His bangs were swept up into his right along with the rest of his rather long hair. It all fell messily around his shoulders but was still somehow kept out of his face. The blade itself was made of what appeared to be obsidian and absorbed all light around it, but the fuller one was a shining silver. They were shocked when even his blade shimmered and changed, turning what had been a plain broadsword into a double-edged broadsword of beauty and death. The handle was wrapped in black leather, and the pommel was a rather plain rectangle with a small link of chain hanging from it. Embroidered into the leather in red was a phoenix in flight, and on the other side was a wyvern dragon stitched in blue. "Everything is better." The man laughed. "As for why I'm here," he said, brandishing his sword and aiming it at Naruto. "To test you, of course. I can't let you get weaker now, can I?" Excitedly, Naruto smiled. "Of course not." They both disappeared from view, and when the group looked down from the waterfall, they were once again standing across from one another in the clearing. Mei and Ino were about to jump down, but Kyuubi and Kakashi stopped them. They both gave them annoyed looks, believing that they were preventing them from seeing their crush, but Kyuubi said, "No, we must stay here," while keeping her eyes on the clearing. Naruto will be forced to employ every tactic in his toolbox for this test, and his sensei won't hold back either. So, Ino sighed. With Kakashi taking over, Kyuubi gave the blonde a fierce look before turning back to face the clearing. "You are aware of Naruto's strength and the destructive potential of some of his techniques, aren't you?" "Yes, this man is in charge of teaching him the majority of those," the girls nodded. Additionally, he taught Naruto the fundamentals of taijutsu and ken. "This guy is just as strong as Naruto." "I would have to agree with you, Scarecrow," Kyuubi thought. "I can only guess how insanely strong he is, maybe even on the level of a Biju. This means the safest place we can be is all the way up here. Maybe." When the girls realized how correct Kakashi could be, they all became serious and turned to face the clearing. They knew Naruto was strong, but he was still a student, and that man, Vincent, was the teacher, and teachers were typically far stronger than students. "Hey, little one. You had better go all out because I'm not going to be forgiving this time," Vincent grinned as he spoke. All of the weight and gravity seals he had on his body were disabled by a chakra pulse that Naruto sent out. Naruto called back with a foxy grin, "You too, sensei." Vincent followed suit, but his pulse shattered the earth beneath his feet, causing the group to gasp as the energy surge struck them. The two grinned and lowered their bodies to their ground in readiness. A wave of air was released from the clash with enough force to impact the waterfall and stop its flow for a few seconds. The two fighters stared into each other's eyes with a grin of excitement and adrenaline on their faces because of this student-teacher match. The two disappeared from everyone's sight, even Kakashi's Sharingan-enhanced sight, as if given an invisible signal. They only reappeared in the middle of the clearing sword crossing sword, and seconds later the ground beneath them exploded under the pressure. This was Naruto's moment to show the man who had saved his life what his choice had resulted in. He was prepared to bleed for the approval of the one person in the entire world whose approval meant anything to him. As the flow of the waterfall fell once more, the two vanished again. Futon. Atsugai, wind release. Pressure damage, Naruto called out as aimed his palm at his sensei. The blast hit the area and the shockwaves caused by the compressed tornado were felt by those atop the waterfall. Vincent had been long gone before then though and reappeared behind Naruto, blade poised to pierce the blonde through the back. Naruto had sensed Vincent just as he arrived behind him thanks to his instincts and managed to spin to the right and using the momentum from his spin attempted a horizontal slash. To the surprise of everyone but Naruto, Vincent caught the blade with his bare hand as it neared his neck. Before Vincent could take advantage of the situation, Naruto blurred away, leaving his katana in Vincent's possession. Before Naruto could do much else, Vincent was on him, Naruto's katana held in a reverse position. Naruto ducked under the swipe from his own blade but was unprepared for Vincent's kick. Vincent's boot met Naruto's chin, sending the blonde teen skyrocketing into the air at breakneck speeds. A lesser being would have surely been decapitated by the force of that kick, but Naruto was not a lesser being. Still, he could feel the shattered pieces of his jawbone and teeth rattle around in his mouth. Bearing the pain, he felt his healing factor kick in and in no time at all his mouth was repaired to perfection again. He was unable to rest though because as he reached the peak of his impromptu flight, reaching halfway up the waterfall, he saw his sensei throw his katana back at him like it were a spear. Righting himself in the air, Naruto caught his blade in a reverse grip and using his mastery over wind nature propelled himself with a boost of wind from his feet, sending him speeding like a rocket back towards the ground. Just as he was about to impact, Naruto sent wind chakra through his blade. Vincent brought up his own sword, meeting the blonde rocket head on. The two clashed and for a second time seemed to have stopped. As it resumed, the ground underneath Vincent exploded, creating a crater underneath him easily 10 feet deep and sending waves of air that stripped some of the closer trees of their leaves. Vincent was no pushover however and had maintained his position, levitating over the crater and still holding back Naruto with only one hand on his blade. This did not mean he was without injury though. As the blades met each other, Naruto had cleverly released his control over the wind coursing around his blade, showering Vincent in thousands of tiny wind blades, leaving his sword arm looking like it had gone through a meat grinder. Atop the waterfall, the group watched in awe as this had all taken place in the span of a minute or so. Both Kakashi and Zabuza had lived through the Third Great Shinobi War and had seen some of the most powerful ninja to walk the world like Minato Namikaze clash against other titans of power, but these two were insane. Even Kyuubi was shocked at the display of power. She herself had fought in battles against the other Biju that were still spoken of in fear of their power, and these two were easily coming close to that. What shocked her even more was that she knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg. Neither had begun to use their truly destructive techniques or release their hold on their power. At a certain level of power there was just no way to be able to control it all, it was just impossible. So instead, to keep their power from constantly leaking out and affecting others around them, beings like Naruto, herself, and Vincent would use some of their power to keep the other part of their power under lock and key, restricting themselves to only a portion of their true potential. The girls were just as shocked. Mei had been rather young by the end of the Third Shinobi War and so had not seen some of the massive damage wrought by titans like Hanzo and the other cages. Still, she was the Kiri rebel leader and had seen the power of a fully realized Jinchuriki thanks to Yagura, and that was the only thing she could compare this battle to. The younger girls could only gape in shock. They had heard tales of the battles waged in the previous wars by people like the Sannin, and even their own Hokage, and they realized that this is what it must have been like to those that saw such battles. To think that their world was full of individuals who had attained such power. And what made it even more shocking was that Naruto had always said that compared to people like his sensei or the other cages, he was not that strong. Sure, he could fight on even ground with some of the weaker cages like the current K's cage, but against people like Hanzo, he was nothing. He had even admitted that against a Sarutobi in his prime he would have been hard-pressed to come out with the win without using his other forms. Vincent used his strength and forced Naruto away. Naruto flipped and landed on the ground, grinning the same grin Vincent was. As Vincent felt the gashes on his arm knit themselves closed, he called out, "That was a nice little warm-up, nay?" Shock coursed through their viewers at that statement. Their warm-up was equal to that of a cage battle. Tilting his neck side to side to crack it, Naruto nodded, "Yay, really got the blood pumping, no holds barred, then?" Vincent replied with a nod. At last, Naruto released his control over his power, and as he did, the chakra he had naturally leaked out started to visibly coalesce around him in the shape of a dark blue cloak with red and gold flecks. Vincent followed suit, and he was covered by a cloak that was easily larger than Naruto's, which was royal purple with sporadic white and black stripes. Vincent shouted, "Motarasu Mokashi, bring the apocalypse," and swung his sword out horizontally, creating a blade of energy that was the same color as his cloak. The swath of energy was easily the size of a small house, and it further damaged the clearing as it tore apart the ground itself. Using his own method, Naruto replied, "Ranton, Kyre Handen, Storm Release, Judgment Cut," and a swath of energy as big as Vincent's, containing Naruto's own distinct chakra coloration, emerged from his blade. Instead of waiting to see which of the two warriors' techniques would prevail, they each poured chakra through their blades, and as their techniques clashed, so did their blades. Energy and swords ground against one another, and sparks and shockwaves flew from the center of the battle until it was finally too much, and both masses of energy imploded, encasing the two fighters. Everyone in the audience knew that whoever prevailed in that struggle would undoubtedly have won the battle, so they waited anxiously to see who had won. The girls let out a gasp as the dust settled, and Kakashi clenched his jaw. His exquisitely crafted sword was buried up to the hilt in the center of Naruto's stomach, but the dust cleared even more to reveal Naruto's blade, which was sheathed in the dead center of Vincent's chest. Vincent stood with his sword arm covered in blood, the blood of his student. After locking eyes and grinning at each other, Naruto coughed out a glob of blood that started to flow freely from his mouth, causing him to let go of his katana and fall to his knees. Vincent then withdrew his blade from Naruto, causing even more blood to pour out of the hole in his stomach now that nothing was preventing it from escaping. Normally, the wound would have started to heal, but because Vincent's blade was coated in his energy, Naruto's healing factor had stalled. Then, with a grunt of pain, Vincent grabbed the hilt of Naruto's katana and tore it out of his chest cavity. His body immediately started to sew up the hole, resembling a sewer reassembling a piece of cloth. Then, like a bag of potatoes, he threw Naruto over his shoulder, sheathed his katana in his belt, and vanished, emerging on top of the waterfall behind the group. They rushed to him as soon as they could sense him, and he buried Naruto's body in the shallow part of the river that turned into the waterfall. Rather than focusing on the wound, he pushed the healing chakra into the flesh surrounding the wound, giving his body enough energy to jumpstart his healing factor. He then picked him up in a similar manner as before, much to the girl's chagrin, and nodded his head in a gesture to follow him. He did this before the girls could accuse him. With a moan of agony, Naruto opened his eyes and was relieved that whoever had placed him in his room had taken the time to draw the blinds. He sat up and stretched out all the kinks in his body before swinging his legs to the side of the bed. He scratched his head and thought, where are all of them? He heard laughter and felt people in his kitchen, so he put on a loose, light shirt and went downstairs. He smiled as he opened the doorway to his rather large kitchen and saw his sensei, his girls, Kakashi, and Zabuza seated around the table, laughing and enjoying themselves. There were bottles of beer in the hands of Zabuza, Mei, and Vincent, and even Kakashi had joined in the celebrations and removed his mask, which had obviously shocked Ino and Yakumo, who knew Kakashi hardly ever removed his mask for some reason they still didn't know. His face was flawless, save for the scar on the eye that held his Sharingan eye, and the girls agreed that Kakashi could be considered handsome. The girls were not wearing their headbands, Kakashi was not wearing his mask and flak jacket, and Naruto noticed that he himself was looking rather relaxed in his thin shirt, barefoot, and pants. In any case, they had moved on and were now enjoying themselves, telling funny stories, laughing about life, and just having a good time. Everyone could be seen relaxing. Zabuza and Vincent's blades were nowhere to be seen, and no one had pouches carrying any kind of weapon. He smiled as he entered the kitchen and said, "Hey sensei, give me a yay." "Sure thing, kiddo." Vincent and everyone else in the room grinned as they looked up. "Join us by pulling up a chair." Naruto did just that by catching the bottle that was thrown at him. "I guess this is what it's like to have a family. Vincent was the father I never had, Kakashi was my brother, Zabuza was my strange uncle, and my girls. Well, my girls. We're here, despite all the crap I've been through and the things I'll have to deal with in the future. Even warriors like us need to rest, so cherish these moments, young one, even though I can feel a storm coming." Naruto smiled as he looked around the table at all the joyful faces. "Well, whatever it is, let it come. I'll be ready," he said. They were not shinobi, they were not trained killers, Kyuubi was not a force of nature, there were no worries, they were all just them. Whether they were humans, demons, or gods, what mattered was the people around them. And so the night went on, with everyone there relishing the respite from the violence and stress of their lives and their jobs. A creature in a blue trench coat kneeled in front of a throne in a room that was dimly lit by blue and yellow lights and covered in mirrors and cloaks of all shapes and sizes. The man seated on the throne appeared to be well into his life, but his body and muscles still had the strength of youth. He was wearing a robe that nearly mirrored the room, and his face was grizzled and wizened, with a set of piercing smoke-gray eyes. His hair fell in straight locks to his shoulders, and a staff was held in his right hand. On top of the staff was a globe, and inside the globe was a double-sided cloak, and stars fluttered. "So is it true?" said the figure on the throne in a rough, rumbling voice. "Has one of them returned at last?" "Yes, sir," said the man in the blue trench coat. "That lineage appears to still be present in one of the worlds. In comparison to the Avarok beasts, how does he fare? He was able to dispatch a pack rather easily, sir. Send a group of Daenerys and one of your men. At all costs, I want him taken care of. Don't force me to get involved like I did the last time." "Yes, sir," gulped the man in the blue trench coat. "This time, I won't let you down." "Do not." Then the man went on, "Leave and do as I say." The man in the trench coat nodded his head and scurried out of the room. Without turning his head or anything else spoke again. "Why are you here, Shinigami?" Wearing a black coat with ragged ends, a man who was taller than most people, 6 feet 5 inches, rose out of the room's shadows. A black mist emerged from beneath the cloak. The cloak's sleeves covered his arms and its hood shadowed the man's face, only revealing what looked to be a pearly white lower jawbone. "I am only here to warn you, Kronos. The boy you want dead is one of Kami's chosen and she has declared as such. Not only that, but Vincent has taken the boy under his wing and trained him." "So what? Are Kami and that damned Valentine now able to interfere in my domain?" said Kronos, who was now sneering. "No, Kronos, he has only been gifted with some of your domain's powers like the Valentine. If you continue to interfere, you will fall at his hands and he will take your spot in the council." The Shinigami spoke in a calm, raspy voice. "They said the same thing about my son Zeus, and look at him now, he is nothing compared to us among the council. True is that as you were still overthrown by him. He now controls that world and its gods, lesser they might be. Enough. That damned Valentine having as much power of my domain as me has long since grated on my nerves, but I will not allow some pathetic human to wield what is mine," cried Kronos, who was then on his feet. The entire room trembled as he spoke, but Shinigami remained motionless, unimpressed or startled by the god's outburst. "Vincent wields the power of almost all our domains, Kronos, such was it decided by the council and him, long before you had claimed your title. The Valentine line has always wielded those powers and served as his right hand, and they will continue to do so. You are interfering in things you should not be, Kronos. No Shinigami you are. This is my domain and I will do as I see fit. Just because you have allowed the humans and some of their worlds to assume some of your duties does not mean I will do the same. Leave?" Kronos yelled with rage. "Seems that the young boy will soon be one of us, and it will be by your own hands that you will fall, Kronos," Shinigami said as he shook his head and started to disappear back into the darkness. He stalked to the balcony overlooking his enormous castle, roaring with rage as the last of Shinigami vanished from his realm. "I will not be made a fool of. I am Kronos, god of space and time, and none shall take that from me." Vincent gave Naruto a firm handshake and said, "Well kid, it was good to see you again, but I gotta get going. Places to be and all that junk." Both of them smiled slightly. "Yay, I know sensei, you got your duties and I have mine, right?" Vincent smiled and lightly tapped Naruto's forehead. "You got it." After his spar with his student, Vincent had stayed for 2 days. Once Zabuza, Kakashi, and the girls had all grown accustomed to having such a strong figure around, they all enjoyed sharing stories, and Vincent even gave Kakashi teacher advice. He had also given everyone some rather intriguing presents. Vincent gave Ino a scroll that described some rather complicated and lost mind arts. However, he waved it off when she asked him what a Jedi was. He gave Yakumo a brush that let her draw anything she wanted in the air around her. Haku received the gift of the Yuki Onna, which strengthened her control over ice. Mei received essentially the same for her own 2 Kekai Genkai. Kyuubi was given the ability to deny the power of the Sharingan and Mokuton over her. Kakashi received the Sharingan in both eyes and it became imbued in his body perfectly, meaning that it was now his Kekai Genkai. And Vincent gave Zabuza the blood of a water demon, making his moniker truly mean something. The day Vincent was first introduced to the Hokage had been an interesting one, and the Kami no Shinobi put himself on his knees and bowed down at Vincent's feet. He expressed his gratitude to Vincent in an impassioned voice for saving Naruto and ensuring that the blonde had the life his parents had desired for him. Not even Naruto was aware that Vincent had taken the man aside and engaged him in a private discussion. Since Sarutobi had returned to the room appearing to have traveled back in time, they knew that he had somehow made amends in Vincent's eyes. Vincent had described how he had used some of his abilities to restore Sarutobi's body to that of a person in his 50s. When Kakashi revealed that Sarutobi was now technically as old, if not younger, than his own pupils, the Sannin, they all laughed heartily. "Oh, and before I forget, take this," Vincent said, tossing a rather large scroll at Naruto after giving him a rather intimate hug. With ease, Naruto caught it and looked at his sensei inquisitively. Observing the bewildered expressions on Naruto's and the others' faces, he responded to the unasked question by saying, "It's a summoning contract. I won't tell you what for, but I will say this: summon the boss first. I would also recommend doing it there, as the boss is rather large, and don't be selfish with the chakra. The boss may take about a tael or so's worth." Vincent smiled and waved before disappearing into thin air. They all turned to look at Naruto with interest after realizing that his sensei was no longer there. Knowing exactly what they were asking, the blonde former Jinchuriki sighed and waved for them to follow him. The blonde quickly led his group across the village after shouldering the scroll and jumping to one of the nearby roofs. The blonde teenager came to a stop on a rooftop far into the village's slums, but this particular structure meant more to him than perhaps Ichiraku ramen. Only the Kyuubi received a knowing glance, and everyone continued to exchange inquisitive looks about why they were standing atop the roof of an abandoned warehouse. The others trailed behind Naruto as he started toward the door leading to the stairwell he had once walked. He guided them down a flight of corroded and worn stairs that ended at an even more corroded and worn iron door, which creaked as Naruto pried it open. Eventually, they reached an open area with nothing but dust in it. The group began to wonder what Naruto was doing because the warehouse was totally deserted and devoid of all life. Naruto calmly said, "Wait here," as he started to move toward the middle of the space. After setting the scroll aside, he started to pour his chakra onto it by pressing his hands into the ground. Before long, the entire room was illuminated by seals that were far more advanced than anything Kyuubi or Kakashi had ever seen. It was literally completely covered in seals. Individual and even overlapping seals painted every inch of the building black. Before long, everyone had to cover their eyes because the seals' glow was too intense for them to bear. When the light faded sufficiently, they discovered that they were on an island the size of Nami no Kuni, complete with a small forest, a desert, a waterfall, a volcano, and even a small compound in the distance, rather than in a dusty and dilapidated warehouse. But what was beyond the island was startling. The island they were standing on literally floated in the center of a deep purple sky with black accents that resembled what might have been clouds. For all they knew, the emptiness they found themselves in seemed to last forever. The group turned to stare at Naruto, who was now approaching them while carrying a scroll on his shoulder. Spreading his unoccupied hand out, he said, "If you were wondering where I disappeared to when I met Vincent Sensei, well, here it is. This is literally an endless void that exists outside of all existence. It is not bound by the natural physics or laws that govern our world or any other." "Where exactly is here Gaki?" Zabuza shouted. They were ninja, and although humans believed that breathing fire and walking on water were commonplace, nothing like this had ever been witnessed. Demons? Yes, of course. Talking snakes and toads. Big ass? I have seen it. Islands situated outside of all existence in the actual, limitless emptiness? That one was brand new. A stunned Kakashi questioned, "Naruto, how is this possible?" Although he had personally witnessed the incredible power of Jikukan techniques, his sensei had developed one of the most well-known. Something of this magnitude had never been seen before. With a straight face, Naruto told the others, "Not even I know the intricacies of it. The only person who does is Vincent, because this is his world. This is the world he created." The others were even more shocked. To be able to use your own abilities alone to create an infinite void? One would need to be a god of some kind to accomplish this? As he started to walk on thin air like they did with trees, Naruto said, "All I do know is that time travels much slower here and that things like this are very much so a possibility." He was now lecturing parallel to the group. "Why don't we do what we're here for before you break them, nay?" Kyuubi said as he approached Naruto and pulled him back onto the island. "Yay, probably." He nodded, laughing uneasily and scratching his head. "Yay, probably. Left my brain hurting when Sensei tried to explain it to me too." He then put on a serious face and unfolded the scroll, revealing that it had no previous names on it, much to the blonde's surprise. Then he bit his finger, shrugged, and signed his name in blood in the scroll's first slot. He rolled it back up, went through the summoning jutsu hand signs, slammed his hands to the ground, pumped chakra into it until he said, "Kachiyose no jutsu." And then nothing happened. Everyone cast curious glances around. They all anticipated a puff of smoke or a chakra surge to indicate the summon's arrival, but there was absolutely nothing. Maybe it wasn't enough. Vincent did say that it would take about a tail's worth, right? Yakumo added. Naruto nodded, started to gather more chakra, and was about to enter the seal sequence when Kyuubi yelled, "Wait. I feel something. Something is coming this way and it's huge." Before anyone could question her, everyone felt it. An enormous presence that far exceeded even the Kyuubi's maximum capacity. It simply was. It wasn't malevolent or even meaning. They all dropped to their knees to stay upright as the entire island started to tremble like there had been an earthquake. However, the shape of something fading past the island caught their attention. They were in the center of a literal hurricane that was forming as the head of something raced past the island at blinding speeds and began to coil its body around it. They could see something moving just beyond the wall of wind, which blocked their view of the emptiness. This continued for at least 5 minutes, much to the concern of everyone in the room, but it soon came to an end, and the revelation left everyone in the room completely stunned and terrified. Far above the island, a thick, scaled body coiled, obstructing the view of the void's purple sky. The head of a gigantic dragon, serpent, or reptile of some kind, with perhaps millions of sharp teeth the size of a skyscraper, peeked from the body as it coiled hundreds of miles above the island, reaching what they assumed to be the sky. The head itself seemed to be bigger than even the island they stood on, and the eyes of the creature were a deep purple with slit pupils. And even the eyes were massive, on the scale of the Hokage monument. They observed that the enormous reptile's body was covered in deep blue scales, each of which was easily the size of a small house. The enormous creature roared, "Who dares to summon me?" ? The group had to use chakra to stay on the island because even the creature's voice carried enough force and pressure. "I did. I am Naruto Uzumaki. Namikaze." Naruto boldly and confidently stepped forward and exclaimed as loudly as he could. The creature then lowered its enormous draconian/serpent-like head from the clouds and brought it to lie just near the island, demonstrating to them that it could swallow them whole, island and all, as if they were a pill, in a single mouthful. "And who are you, boy? I have only given one being permission to summon me and you are clearly not him. Though," and here the creature sniffed, causing the group to use chakra to stop themselves from flying into the creature's nostrils, "I can smell him on you. Tell me how you came into contact with Master Valentine?" Naruto again stood and using chakra to make his voice louder he answered, "He took me as a student many years ago. He then visited me again recently and gave me your summoning contract as a gift." The massive creature began to move its coils, relaxing its body and showing the group that even after coiling around the island its tail end stretched hundreds of miles into the void. He did mention a student with blonde hair. "You also bear the name of the Namikaze. Very well, I shall allow you to summon those of this contract, but I warn you, do not summon me nor those of my level unless it is absolutely necessary. To take us away from our duties without reason may end in your death, student of Master Valentine or not." Before the massive creature could leave, Naruto called out, "Pardon me, but I do not know your name nor those under you." The massive being turned its head and answered, "Those of this contract are what you humans consider myth. Gorgons, death worms, hellhound, even the Fae may be called upon. When using this contract you must be specific on whom or what race you wish to summon. Even the great beings of the world such as Behemoth and Leviathan may be summoned. As for myself, Master Valentine deemed me worthy to be the boss of this contract. Your race has called me many things: the world worm, he who bites his own tail, child of Loki, the serpent of Midgard. I am the world serpent, Jormungandr." As the creature began to slither away, they all breathed a sigh of relief. To see a creature of such massive size was frightening to anybody, even Kyuubi. That's when something in Kyuubi's mind clicked and she gasped rather loudly, causing everyone to turn to her. She shook her head and said, "Do any of you realize who that was?" And Ino chose that moment to be a smartass. "Duh. He told us who he was." Kyuubi gave the girl a side glare before she shook her head. No, not just his name but why he's called the world serpent." At that everyone shook their head. He gained his name partly due to his size but also for his power as well as his duty. Among demons, summons, and such, it is rumored that he is the son of Loki the trickster god and the giantess Angerbua. As such, his power is equal to that of most gods, and being the son of a giantess, well, that's why he is so large. He is called the world serpent because he can wrap himself around the entire world and bite his own tail. As such, he was named as one of the guardians to the gates of the realm of gods. The only beings who would dare challenge him in battle are the very gods themselves, and even among them some of the lesser gods are fearful of having to do so. It's also said that when he stops biting his own tail that the apocalypse is upon us. Whoa, wait, he wasn't biting his tail, still isn't, as it just flew past us, so does that mean? Questioned a slightly panicking Naruto. Kyuubi shook her head in the negative. "No, that's just a rumor. But I think it does hold some truth. It may just mean that if he were defeated or something. There are other beings that are said to bring about the apocalypse as well, so I can't say for sure. Biju are actually pretty low on the totem pole of such creatures, and our world is much more isolated from others too." Kyuubi had taken the time to explain to the group who she was exactly after Vincent had, accidentally, let it slip, and the others had responded surprisingly well to the news. Because she contributed to Naruto's survival and because her actions were not her fault, the girls liked her. Even Kakashi concurred with them and did not hold her accountable for his sensei's or anyone else's passing. He placed all the blame on the Uchiha who had forced her to do it. They also found blame with the Shoden and his wife Mito for having imprisoned her along with her fellow Biju out of fear and then using them as bartering pieces to give to the other villages without regard for the consequences of doing so, even the feelings of the Biju themselves. And what about the others he mentioned? What are, Gogans? Gorgons? Asked May as she scratched her head trying to think of what others the world serpent had mentioned. Kyuubi again gave a negative head shake. "Gorgons and those I don't know. Naruto may have to ask Vincent about them, though I do recall the names Leviathan and Behemoth from somewhere." Before she snapped her fingers, "They're another set of beings said to coincide with the apocalypse. Leviathan is a massive water dragon that rules the seas of heaven, hell, and even earth. Behemoth is a huge land beast that rules the grounds of heaven, hell, and earth. It's said that only God can capture and destroy them." They all turned to the contract. "So the contract Vincent gave the Gaki is literally full of creatures like that?" Zabuza asked. "I can only assume so, yes," Kyuubi said. Zabuza then turned to Naruto and slapped him on the back. "Fucking Gaki. You just don't stop, huh?" causing everyone to burst into laughter. His parents did what?" echoed the unified yell of Naruto and his harem. Sarutobi chose this moment to remove the cotton he had placed in his ears. He had fully expected such a reaction from them and had prepared himself accordingly. Now that you have that out of your system, I'll repeat it once more. Naruto's parents, specifically Kushina, set up a marriage contract with Minato's former teammate Sume Inazaka stating that their son, Yu Naruto, would marry Sume's daughter. And as you all know, since Naruto is the last of both the Uzumaki and Namikaze clan as well as being the village's Jinchuriki, he must take on multiple wives, and since your parents made this contract you are obligated to fulfill its terms. Sarutobi, as much as most men would love that, I don't think I could do it. It seems so wrong of me to agree to this contract and force the girl into something she may not want to do. She might already be dating someone, for all I know. He may not harbor any resentment towards his parents for their actions, but the fact remains that they chose to force a fate upon him knowing full well what the consequences of that choice would be. As a result, he would never do the same to another human being. Naruto spoke with conviction. I refuse to force this upon her. He hated the idea of people being forced to do something against their will, and he would be damned if he was the reason that happened to someone else. Besides, he did not want to have to convince his already rather large harem to accept another. He still had some of the bruises from Mei, Ino, and Kyuubi from when he had told them about the whole CRA thing. All three knew of it and knew that it would fall to him, but that still didn't make it easy on them. Mei, however, eventually came to accept it as she realized that with her duties to her own village that she would not be able to spend as much time with Naruto unless either one of them left their village for the other. As much as she liked the idea of the Uzumaki clan being in Kiri, she would never make Naruto decide. Kyuubi had long since come to terms with it, being that polygamy in demon culture was rather commonplace due to the small number of demons left in the first place. On top of that, the male-to-female ratio was vastly unbalanced with far too many females and far too few powerful enough male demons. Still, she didn't have to like it. She was a rather possessive demoness after all. Ino had begrudgingly accepted it after she learned what the CRA was and why Naruto legally had to abide by it. If he didn't abide by it, he would be forced to become a breeding machine and father children with various other females handpicked by the council, and that bothered her way more than sharing him with girls she knew and respected. Yakumo had told Naruto that she always knew it was coming and had prepared herself because, like the others, she didn't particularly like it, but the alternative wasn't any better. She had told him that she was happy as long as he didn't forget about her and showed that he cared for her, and she had actually told him in no small words that he didn't even have to do that because she owed him her very life, her sanity, and a lot more that she felt he could do with her as he desired. Naruto, being Naruto, had embraced her tightly and assured her that he would never do such a thing to her or any of the girls because she had also prevented him from becoming a lonely and friendless Jinchuriki. Haku had agreed with Yakumo because she also believed that she owed him a life debt, and he had gone above and beyond what most people would have done for anyone, much less a pair of rogue nin from Kiri, by saving her from Yakumo, saving her father, and allowing them to live in his house. It was also advantageous to her because the council had demanded that she be turned into a breeding stock when they discovered she had the Hiden Kekai Genkai. Fortunately, both Naruto and the Hokage had stopped that, but the council was still trying. However, if she married Naruto under the CRA, she would be reviving both clans, which would save her from becoming a victim of the CRA herself. A new voice said, "Thanks Naruto-san, but it's fine." They all turned to see a girl who appeared to be a few years older than Naruto and Haku, with long brown hair that was worn in a ponytail, leaving 2 strands to frame her face. She was wearing the Konoha standard flak jacket, and it appeared to be all she wore as a top because it was zipped up halfway, revealing quite a bit of the girl's cleavage. Her bottom half was dressed in rather tight shorts that ended just above the knee. Her eyes were soft brown, and her cheeks were lightly tanned, identifying the Inazaka fang marks on them. "Thank you for the gesture, but if we didn't follow through, we'd both end up in serious trouble, right?" "You got that right, kiddo. Besides, Naruto-kunmi and your mother set this up for good reason," she said, turning to face the Inuzuka matriarch and her mother Sume Inazaka. She then picked up her daughter as though she weighed nothing and started to show her off as though she were a doll or something. "Besides, look at her. Come on, Naruto. You have to acknowledge that my daughter is sexy." "Damn it, mom, stop it and put me down." Hana angrily chastised her mother for, "I am not a damn doll to be bought." Coughing into his hand, Sarutobi said, "Aside from that, Sume is right. She and your mother arranged the agreement so that each clan would support the other with their special skills and turn into allies. You also need to consider the political ramifications. You will have the support of not only your clans and me, but also your wives' clans when you do choose to run for both of your clans' seats on the council. You would almost certainly always have the support of the Yamanaka, Inuzuka, and Kurama clans." Naruto shook his head. I know I'm not stupid. Being a Jinchuriki and the heir to 2 now. Dead clans. Vincent made sure I learned as much as I could about politics. Naruto sighed and combed his golden hair, saying, how about we first get to know one another? If it works out, we can fulfill the contract. However, we will amend the agreement to terms that we both agree upon if it doesn't work out for whatever reason. As Soon considered the statement, well, as much I would like for my daughter to finally get laid, Hana grinned in response to Naruto's thoughtful gesture. Mom. Soon waved it away, saying, I understand what you're attempting to do, and I have to say that you truly are like your parents. Soon then approached the blonde and extended her hand, saying, you got a deal, Naruto. As the head of the Inuzuka clan, I accept the conditions stated. With a firm handshake and a nod, Naruto said, and I as clan heir also agree to the terms and will ensure my end of the deal is carried out. What's that other file you have there, Hokage? Sama. The Sandame coughed once more and appeared quite uneasy as a rather irritated Naruto and Harem gazed at him. Well, you see, your father, may have set up a contract with the Kazekage in a bid to tighten our village's bonds, inquired a curious Kakashi. I guess. Damn it, Kami, I hope you two are having fun. In heaven. At this point, we see Kushina and Minato laughing themselves to tears while rolling on the ground with their stomachs in their hands. Wearing a loose white robe that stretched to fit her assets, a stunning blonde woman who seemed to exude everything positive shook her head as she observed the two. You guys are so cruel to your own son. Yeah, but you have to admit Kami.Nay the kid puts on a hell of a show. Smiled the man who stood next to her, who appeared to be her twin. He had black hair, a black robe, and a crooked crown that held several medium-sized rubies. Not quite as good as your Vincent, but definitely among the best, he made fun of it. A few seconds later, he was on the ground tending to a rather big bump that his sister's fist had given him. Yami, shut up. Oni.san treats me so cruelly. Are you still a little anxious, Naruto.kun? Hana spoke. She was dressed much differently than she usually was, as this was the night they had agreed they would go on a date to test the waters. When Naruto had seen the Inuzuka heiress, he couldn't help but gape. She had walked out dressed in a rather form-fitting black strapless dress that was held up by her impressive bust. The dress was a smooth satin that was a rather plain except for a few pleats where it ended at her knees, giving it a somewhat skirt-like look to it. The little black number left her arms bare, which showed that like any good kunoichi she took her training serious and that she was fit and had some tone to her arms. Not overly so, but enough to show she was indeed a ninja. She had also let her hair down and it now cascaded smoothly down to just past her shoulders and framed her face, highlighting her Inuzuka clan marks even more. She had only put on the barest amount of eyeliner, and the blonde loved it as he didn't very much like girls who caked on the make-up. To top it all off, she had worn a pair of black high heels that matched her dress perfectly. Taking off his headband, Naruto wore a rather nice white long-sleeved dress shirt with a black vest over it, black jeans, and black dress boots. His hair fell almost exactly like his father's, but his bangs were a little longer and almost shadowed his eyes, bringing out the bright blue ones. Hana had her arms around Naruto's right arm as they strolled through the streets of Konoha to the location Naruto had selected for their date. Yeah, sorry about that, just a lot on my mind, Naruto said, letting out a sigh. Seeing that he had gained a few inches and was now slightly taller than her, Hana simply grinned up at him and said, don't worry. If I were you, I would be equally anxious. However, I'm shocked at how well you're managing it. The majority of guys would simply adore being in your shoes. Smirking at the brunette, Naruto said, well, I'm not like most guys, am I? He concluded by giving a rather corny wink. No, you're not Naruto.kun, and that's why I'm okay with this, they said, laughing heartily. You would be my first choice if I had to pick someone to forcefully marry. They chuckled at their predicament once more, saying, well, I'm glad you think so, Hana-chan. After that, they fell into a relaxed silence, simply taking pleasure in each other's company. Even though he had made it clear that he loved and cared for each of the girls equally, they still fought over Naruto time. The only reason he allowed it to happen was because he knew deep down that they all actually liked and respected each other quite a bit, and they fought more as a way to have fun, which he couldn't blame them for. Being a ninja wasn't exactly the best career for your mental health, so anything that could take your mind off the horrors and realities of ninja life was a blessing. Naruto actually felt somewhat relieved that it was just him and Hana tonight. Say you never did say where you were taking me, just that I should get dressed up, Hana inquired intently. The blonde simply kissed his date on the cheek, surprising them both. Before things could get awkward, Naruto saw their destination and led them to the front doors of a well-lit, two-story establishment with a fancy sign that read, The Smoldering Leaf, in cursive letters. Hana simply pouted at that. Naruto simply laughed and responded with yet another corny wink, that my lovely date is a surprise. Hana turned to her date and gasped when she realized where they were going. The smoldering leaf. One of the most expensive restraints available is this one. To make enough money to eat here, you would have to complete nearly 2A ranks. How are you able to afford this? With a sly smile, Naruto said, let's just say that my mom and dad left me more than just jutsu scrolls, a lot more. The maitre d', who had pearly white eyes that indicated he was a member of the Hyuga clan, greeted them before Hana could question the blonde, saying, Sir. Madam, the well-dressed man said, nodding at each. He then led the couple through the restaurant and up to the outside balcony on the second floor where Naruto pulled out Hana's chair for her. The maitre d' left them with a menu each before bowing and exiting. How did he know what table or who you were? Come on, Hana. Chan, how many blonde namakazes are there running around Konoha? Naruto said, glancing at the menu. He was correct after all, because, as it turns out, there weren't many blondes running around Konoha. In fact, there weren't many blondes running around the elemental nations, making the brunette sweat drop. Even though Naruto had his own lil harem, he had known most of them for years, and in the case of Mei, they had met under circumstances that brought them close. He had very little experience in what most would consider normal dating circumstances. The two then concentrated on the menu, and after placing their order from the maitre d', they passed the time by sharing various mission stories, of which Naruto surprisingly had almost as many as Hana, a seasoned Junin. Eventually, the conversation shifted to much more personal stories, and the two became visibly relaxed around each other. Hana wasn't known as one of the 3 ice queens of Konoha for nothing. Many a man had pursued her and all had been turned down or, in the case of the more fervent and perverted suitors, been on the receiving end of her Ninken the Haimaru triplets. Coupled with being a rather dedicated and hard-working kunoichi, Hana was as unused to the dating scene as Naruto was. She had actually been opposed to the whole marriage idea, but after finding out who she was to be married to, she couldn't complain. What kind of person Naruto was far from a secret, with the Hokage, Kakashi, and several other rather influential figures speaking highly of the teen. With such people vouching for the teen, she had done some investigating and found that contrary to popular belief, he had not forced the Yamanaka and Kurama clan heirs into being with him. It had actually been the 2 young kunoichi who had pursued the blonde teen rather doggedly. Seeing the kind, caring, outspoken, and intelligent teen Naruto she really couldn't find a reason to not agree to the marriage contract. It also helped that Naruto's body showed the efforts of his training and had each characteristic that had made his father the #1 sought-after male in the elemental nations. As a member of one of the clans that was more in tune with nature, Hana was able to sense the raw power that emanated from Naruto, and his aura made him an alpha among alphas. Naruto's appearance, along with the combined mindset, personality, and strength of both his parents, with no flaws, made him the ideal husband for most women. As Naruto led her back to the Inazaka compound at the end of the night, Hana had already made up her mind that Naruto would be her husband, mate, and that she would do everything in her power to ensure that he was worth it. She knew that being such an alpha meant that he would essentially have to have multiple mates, and that he would be more than capable of providing for all of their needs, if he had even half the stamina he displayed in training or combat. When they reached the compound's entrance, Hana chose to begin by giving Naruto a rather passionate kiss, leaving the blonde speechless and stunned. As he stood there, eyes wide, Hana waved goodbye to him, adding a little extra sway to her attractive hips. These girls are gonna be the death of me, I swear, Naruto said with a laugh as he walked away. I didn't think that Suna had come here to start a war with Konoha by attacking the Hokage's grandson, a very composed Naruto said from beneath a tree branch. He was in the lotus position, using chakra to adhere to the underside of the branch, when he noticed a teenager about his age holding Konohamaru Sarutobi by the scruff of his shirt while wearing an all-black one-piece jumpsuit with some paint on his face. Everyone in the room, including Konohamaru's 2 friends, turned to hear the voice and saw Naruto. Oh, and since my teammate doesn't like smartasses, I would suggest that you refrain from making a clever remark, Yakumo? As Naruto stated that, Kankuro could feel a kunai's sharp tip pressing into his back with enough force to rip a hole in his clothes. The blade wasn't close to anything important, but it would still cause pain and prevent him from harming the child or taking revenge. You're correct, Naruto-kun. As she drove the ninja knife into the older teen's back, the composed Kurama heiress said, but you and Ino are the only exception. Tamari felt the cold steel of a kunai pressed into her throat as she tried to assist her foolish brother. This stopped her from moving. In the best-case scenario, she would lose her voice box. In the worst-case scenario, she would die. Now none of that. The voice of Ino, who was holding the kunai that was pressed against the blonde Suna Kunoichi's throat, said, "Your teammate has dug his own grave by attempting to harm the honorable grandson, and as Konoha shinobi we cannot allow that to slide." Naruto calmly let go of his chakra and let gravity carry him to the ground, flipping just in time to land on his feet. He then approached Kankuro, grabbed Konohamaru from the teen's grasp, turned, and smiled kindly at the three kids, saying, "Go on you guys and play somewhere else. Later, when we have some free time, the girls and I will stop by and play with you all." The blonde teenager was saluted by the Konohamaru corps members, patent pending. "You got it, boss." The little Sarutobi yelled, and kicked their asses good, as they fled. Naruto waved and grinned at the children who were running away. A few months ago, Hiruzen had introduced Naruto to his grandson in the hopes that he would be a good influence on the young Sarutobi. The relationship had been a little rough at first because of the child's conceit, but Naruto quickly smacked that out of him, literally earning his respect. When Naruto defeated the special Junin Ebisu with minimal effort, the young child loudly declared that he would one day be just as strong as Naruto. An elderly, composed voice said, "Thank you Naruto for helping our grandchildren, but I think we can take it from here." Naruto grinned and bowed to the voice, and Ino and Yakumo put their kunai away to follow suit. The two elders of the village, as well as the former genin teammates of the Hokage, Kaharu Udatane and Homura Mitokado, were standing just a few feet away. Temari and Kankuro's plans to escape the situation unharmed vanished when they heard Naruto say, "Not a problem, esteemed elders." Sweating and in a panic, Kankuro thought, "Fuck me sideways." Temari thought, "I'm going to skin Kankuro alive if we survive this." Before more could be said, the elders and Team 7 turned to see a figure in a sand shunshin. When the sand cleared, the figure turned out to be a boy about Naruto's age with short red hair, a big gourd on his back, and the kanji for love on his forehead above his eye. He nodded to the elders and then said in a low monotone, "I must apologize for my foolish teammates. I promise to bring them to the attention of our Junin sensei and ensure that they face consequences. As much as I would like to think otherwise, we will still report this to Hokage Sama because we are shinobi and lying is in our nature." Homura said sharply, "I would be very careful the rest of your stay here in our village, whether you are Cascade children or not." With his arms still folded, Gaara nodded once more before turning to face Naruto and the girls and saying, "You pique my interest. What are your names?" They stared at each other for a few more minutes before Gaara turned and walked away, followed nervously by his brother and sister. "My name is Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki and these are my teammates Ino Yamanaka and Yakumo Kurama," Naruto said calmly as he looked directly back at Gaara. As the Suna team left, Team 7 and the elders stood where they were, and Kaharu spoke, keeping her gaze fixed forward as they turned the corner. "So Naruto, what did you think?" "There isn't much to say that hasn't already been said. He is undoubtedly strong, but he does not possess any of that power. The Ichibi essentially has unrestricted control over his body and mind, which has advantages but also numerous drawbacks," a composed Naruto said. It was true that many shinobi clans and even the elders had suffered significant losses to the Kyuubi, but they were still shinobi. The elders had survived the 3 wars, and the majority of the clan heads had survived 2 of them. While it was true that most civilians hated Naruto and the reminder that he was, the ninja side was fully aware of just what their Yondaime had done. As sad as it was, they knew that a broken Jinchuriki would do them no good, so that motivated many, the elders especially, to reach out and help Naruto when they could. It was during one of his many forays back into the village that he had bumped into the 2 elderly shinobi when some drunks thought they could bully him. He could have handled the situation himself as they just drunk civilians, but he still appreciated the help they had offered him. Since moving back into the village, Naruto had come to occasionally seek out their advice on matters and even help them with their grandchildren. It also helped that they had never once tried to hide anything from him and were always brutally honest when answering any of his questions, which earned them his respect and loyalty. This had actually been a sore spot for Hiruzen, who would see his teammates talking with Naruto the way he had many years ago. Nonetheless, they knew their teammate better than most and were actually the reason Naruto had considered giving Hiruzen a second chance to earn his respect and trust back. "We are in complete agreement. But do you think you could deal with him if it came to that? This is what Jinchuriki were made to do, and Naruto would be one of their few defenses against the unstable Jinchuriki," asked an equally composed Homura, who had a duty to protect his village and its citizens, just like a Kage would. In his normal state, Naruto boasted, "Yeah, no problem, and even if he has access to a transformed state, my new summons should be more than enough to handle Ichibi." He hadn't told anyone yet that he had almost turned into a Biju himself, and he wanted to keep that as a backup plan in case something went wrong. Even though he couldn't exactly control all of the power at his disposal, he could still use it as a means of intimidation. Good to know, Naruto-kun, Koharu said with a nod. We will now leave you and your team to prepare for the tests as best you can. Greetings. Team 7 bowed to the departing elders, and the girls glomped Naruto, smashing his face between their blossoming busts, as soon as they left. They will actually kill me, but wow, what a way to go. Our young protagonist was sitting on his father's head on the Hokage monument, his legs hanging off the edge, on a dark, starry night. Some might have thought he was there to meditate or something similar, but he was there just to take in the night air and the view the monument provided, with his eyes fixed on the starry sky while the soft breeze brushed his body, his hair and his unzipped cloak flapping lightly. He loved and treasured these times of calm. He enjoyed a good fight as much as anyone else, the excitement of missions, and even the strange situations he got into because of his girls, but he also needed these alone times to stay sane. He grinned slightly as he sensed several chakra sources coming toward him from the forest behind him. He saw Kakashi emerge from the corner of his right eye, standing a few feet away from him without a book. He saw the Sandame emerge from a flurry of leaves to his left, dressed in his cage robes and smoking a pipe. He turned his head to the left and kissed Kyuubi as she put her arms around his neck from his back. He repeated the gesture with Mei, who took a position opposite Kyuubi. Hana then took a spot to his left, her head resting on his shoulder. Ino then took the spot to his right, mirroring Hana. Yakumo and Haku then seated themselves against the left and right sides of his chest, and, to Kakashi's right, a surprisingly composed Zabuza appeared in a Mizu Shunshin. For a while, nobody said anything, and they just savored the quiet that was provided to them, gazing at the stars or the lights of the village. Hiruzen interrupted the silence by asking, "Are you prepared for the tests?" Nobody looked away to respond, but Naruto calmly and confidently said, "The exams, they will be simple, but I think we should be prepared for more from now on." It was Kakashi who posed the query, "More? What else might there be?" Naruto simply shrugged and said, "I have no idea, but I have a feeling that the coming months will be extremely crazy. Additionally, since I'm involved, strange things are bound to happen." Everyone just laughed, but they were aware of how true the blonde was when she said that nothing could ever be normal when Naruto was involved. He could turn an ordinary park walk into a defying battle with a foreign nin, but then again, it made sense. His name meant Maelstrom, and damned if he didn't live up to it, and he drastically altered every situation he encountered. A small army of the Daenerys creatures was seen gathering miles away outside of Konoha. They were so numerous that anyone who happened upon the gathering would have fled in terror at the sight alone, but they would have obviously not made it very far. The deformed creatures looked up as a tiny, almost wormhole-like portal opened above them, and a man who appeared to be in his 20s emerged, standing on the air itself, wearing a robe of fur and a rather large gold necklace with a ruby the size of a baby's hand in the center. His arms were adorned with jewels scattered throughout his gray and black clothing, as well as in his dark blue hair, which reached to his mid-back in spikes and was swept up and out of his face. His face was blemished, save for a rather large scar that ran from his right cheekbone to the left of his jawbone. A fierce pair of gray eyes scanned the beasts. "TCH is shocked that the captain put me in this position," the man's raspy voice said. "Brat can't be that strong, but whatever, as long as I get to blow shit up I'm happy." He turned to the Daenerys and said, "All right, you ugly fuckers, let's go. We have a lot of ground to cover, and I can't wait to see this kid who's making everyone anxious." The Daenerys made their way to follow their leader, Konohagakure no Sato, as the man turned and started to walk on air with a flap of his fur robe. At that precise moment, a pair of ice blue eyes in Naruto's mindscape snapped open. "That bastard is here," thought Yamato, Naruto's ancestor, as he looked away from the painting in front of the Gothic chapel and toward a picture depicting the same black-cloaked figure wielding a massive sword and holding a beautiful woman covered in crimson blood on a cliff, while a man who looked and dressed eerily similar to the jewel-encrusted man clutched his face, pouring blood from his hands. "Complete what I began, Naruto. Take out the jerk for what he did to our family and what he might try to do to yours. Be successful where I was unsuccessful." Finished Yamato, he bowed his head and clenched his fists, letting a single tear fall from his blue eyes, which now contained incalculable sorrow, guilt, and grief. A certain blonde was just finishing his morning workout with his teammates as the sun rose and started to warm the village of Konoha. They had been working out for hours at this point, and even the stamina monster that was Naruto was panting lightly. They were all dressed in their training clothes instead of the typical gear they wore while on missions or something, and Kakashi had given up his usual outfit in favor of a tight black shirt and blue shorts, as well as a face mask that revealed a face that many would describe as handsome underneath. Zabuza and Haku would normally join them for their morning training, but Zabuza had been busy going through his last mental evaluation, and he had gone out drinking in celebration, so he would definitely wake up in an hour or two with a huge hangover. Haku had taken her evaluation the night before and was still exhausted from pushing herself to earn the ranking of Tokubetsu Junin. "I'll see the three of you later." Kakashi laughed and said, "Make sure I look good as the sensei." He nodded to his three teammates and students and then shunned back to his house to clean up. Naruto.kun, see you later, as she also shined back to her family's compound, Ino said. After giving Naruto a hug and a cheek kiss, Yakumo vanished into her own world. "I don't understand why you keep training your body in that manner," a certain vixen, perched in a tree above Naruto, declared. "It's already well beyond the capabilities of humans and is well into demon territory." Naruto simply smiled and shook his head, saying, "Even though that is true, it doesn't mean I can't get better. Furthermore, not all people are weak." Observe Tsunade, the Sannin. She was rumored to be able to smash mountains with just her fist. Before yipping in surprise as she was lifted into his arms bridal style, Kyuubi childishly stuck her tongue out at her former container and huffed at him for taking her by surprise. Then she said, "You smell." In order to prepare for the events of today, Naruto simply laughed as he drove home, determined to make sure he was more than ready for whatever it was that lay ahead, despite his instincts telling him to be ready. Team 7 had dressed to impress, or rather, to impose. Naturally, Naruto was wearing his tattered black cloak, which he had pulled up to conceal his face and give his already commanding appearance even more intimidation. Yakumo was dressed in her usual long-sleeved attire, but she also wore a black leather vest over her purple sweater. Naruto had woven seals into the jacket to give the rather frail girl some additional protection from physical attacks. It wasn't much, but it would be sufficient to halt the majority of genin and reduce the damage from anything above that. The same seals that Yakumo had on her vest were also on Ino's jacket, which ended at her midriff and had sleeves that ended at her wrists. Ino also had an abundance of storage seals that contained different poison senbon in case she needed them. Ino had also chosen to add an additional layer to her ensemble in the form of a thin, flexible black jacket. Overall, they resembled seasoned ninjas more than they did brand-new academy genins, something that was not true of the majority of their peers. They discovered this as they walked through the academy to the testing room, passing individuals like Kiba, Sasuke, Hinata, and others who appeared to have been largely unaffected by the ninja life, which was fair enough given that they weren't living in a time of war, so genin didn't need to be ready as quickly as had previously been expected. It was unclear whether this was a good or bad thing. The three members of Team 7, however, did not take this quiet moment for granted because they knew that in the shinobi world, such moments were fleeting and they did not want to be taken by surprise if they were called into the front lines. Having a nin who had witnessed the atrocities of war firsthand as your sensei, a student of the renowned Yondaime Hokage, also helped. Although Kakashi was still haunted by the past, he had learned to cope and understood that he was still alive and breathing because of the sacrifices made by those around him, and that to tarnish their sacrifices by being any less than what he was truly capable of was to spit on their graves. It would take more than a few genin trying to act tough to scare away the gathered force of Ki from the various other teams when Team 7 opened the doors to the testing room for the first part of the Chunin exams. They had massacred an entire business tycoon's thug army, amassed bounties of several rogue nin, and made friends with the notorious Zabuza Momoichi, the demon of the hidden mist. Instead of backing down, Team 7 turned and returned the key in kind, refusing to back down. They had already attracted some attention with their small entrance, but when you have Ino and Naruto on your team, you tend to attract some attention. Team 7 chose to do what they do best, which is to hide in the shadows of the room and maintain a low profile, since they were an assassination team with Naruto as their demolitions and a one-man army backup if necessary. However, this plan was quickly abandoned when the other Rookie 9 members discovered them, much to their annoyance. "Hey, Yakumo, Naruto, and Ino. Are you trying to look cool there?" The always boisterous Kiba greeted everyone with a shout. The two blondes, who were known for being rather loud and boisterous themselves, at least knew when to tone it down, but Kiba? Not so much. Naruto and Ino just face-palmed at that. "Kiba, please stop talking before I poison you and render you worthless. Do you understand?" With a sickly sweet smile on her face, Ino spoke. When Yakumo and Naruto saw that face, they both moved as far away from the Inuzuka as they could. Ino's use of that face and voice usually indicated that her next victim would soon be in excruciating pain. Shikamaru sighed, "It's troublesome. I think they were trying to stay hidden and keep a low profile." "Is TCH too terrified to compete?" someone named Uchiha said. "No, Sasuke, we're just not idiots like the lot of you are," Naruto said. rubbing the bridge of his nose in frustration. Don't get him wrong, he enjoyed the company of his comrades. Even Sasuke, who only grated on his nerves occasionally, but right now they were being rather troublesome. Not recording Hinata's stutter because it irritates her and she isn't significant enough to make the effort. I apologize, guys. The shy Hyuga heiress stammered. Kiba.kun just wanted to say hi. Yakumo remarked, don't apologize for the dumbass Hinata, from behind her sleeve. Shino said to Naruto. Good to see you too, Shino. Naruto nodded back. Most people would find this seemingly strange exchange confusing, but Naruto was the only non-Aburame who could fully comprehend the bug user's silence because he was an empath and had a good understanding of body language. Shoji continued to happily eat his chips despite the fact that he was just delighted to see all of his former classmates. Before he could say anything more, Naruto had drawn his sword and placed it at the throat of a shinobi with silver hair who appeared to be a few years older than them. Naruto remarked, sneaking up on a group of ninja is a good way to end up dead, ya know, in a tone so icy that it sent shivers down Sasuke's spine. With narrowed eyes, Naruto thought, this guy is not right. He reeks of evil and malice. It's damn near clogging up my empath sense with its thickness. In addition, he had to restrain himself from countering my blade. Only a Junin would have fast enough reflexes for that. He silently communicated his thoughts to Ino and Yakumo by pulsing his chakra in a very specific pattern to alert not only his teammates but also the higher-ups. Sasuke's hand lowered to his weapons pouch, Shino appeared to begin buzzing, and Shikamaru sighed before appearing to be slightly more alert. He was shocked to see that Sasuke, Shikamaru, and Shino had all tensed when they felt his signal, indicating that they too knew what it meant. Whoever the man was, he didn't respond, indicating that either he hadn't detected the pulses or had dismissed them entirely. Sweating, the silver-haired nin raised his hands and exclaimed, hey, whoa, I didn't mean any harm. You see, I'm also a Konoha nin. Pointing to his headband, he said. Oh no, Jinchuriki almost exposed my secret, Orochimaru. Sama would not have approved of that. Naruto made the decision to comply and learn the truth about the man's situation. Naruto chuckled nervously and rubbed the back of his head. Hey, sorry about that. Guess I was just way too jittery, he acknowledged. According to the solver-haired genin, no harm done, and I can understand seeing as you guys are newbies to this. When Yakumo and Ino realized what Naruto was attempting, they also cooperated with him. You've already taken the test, right? Yakumo spoke from behind her sleeve. Oh, I see. I apologize. The now-named Kabuto grinned broadly and said, my name is Kabuto Yakushi. Naruto thought, I'll give him that, he's a damn good actor. And yay, could say I'm somewhat of a veteran, the nin continued to smile. You've taken them how many times? Curious, Ino asked. When Kabuto said, about 7 now, everyone started to perspire. Red flags were being raised on the inside, though, because no matter how pitiful you were, you couldn't take the test 7 times and not get promoted once, or even get a field promotion in between. In all truthfulness, getting field promoted to Chunin was the most common way for genin to rank up. The Chunin exams happened far too sparingly for it to actually serve the purpose of its name, and with so few of the genin even making it through to the finals, it was just not efficient. The exams had also been a somewhat recent thing in the shinobi world and so still had a few bugs to work out. Usually if a sensei of a team thought his or her genin did well enough to actually be promoted, they would take an outside mission just so they could give their team a field promotion. Then they would do the paperwork, the cage would review it, and if approved, voila. Those genin were now chunin. If this guy had stayed a genin long enough to take 7 exams, he was either lying about the number or was some kind of spy. If he was telling the truth, he was a spy, because if a nin stayed a genin for that long, they would have been removed from the active duty roster and either sent to a boot camp to get them up to speed or kicked out of the program entirely. Villages view genin who didn't advance in their skills or get promoted were considered liabilities because they could easily go rogue or be tempted to join another village and sell out secrets. So you have some knowledge of the tests, correct? Ino inquired once more. I can't say what this exam will be like because each village hosts it differently and it changes every time to keep genin on their toes. However, after doing some research, I was able to gather some pretty helpful information about this year's participants. As he took out a rather thick deck of cards, he said. Everyone was genuinely intrigued by this, and Sasuke was the first to inquire, do you have information on specific nin? Yes, I do. Kabuto grinned and replied. Naruto Uzumaki, Haku Momoichi, and Rock Lee, asserted Sasuke. Naruto just laughed, recalling the good times when Sasuke had run into him and Haku while they were out and about, called Haku a harem girl, and then had the ice user hand him his ass. Though the kid was obviously very good at taijutsu, the blonde Uzumaki did wonder why he wanted to know about Rock Lee. He was too kind to have done anything to annoy Duck Ass, so he laughed when he saw the bruise that was developing on Sasuke's cheek and realized what had most likely happened. Well, Naruto Uzumaki, Konohagakure no Sato Genin, Yakumo Kurama and Ino Yamanaka are teammates, and the renowned Sharingan no Kakashi is their sensei. According to Wo, his Kenjutsu is Anbu, his Genjutsu is Chunin, his Taijutsu is probably Chunin, and his Ninjutsu is at least Junin level. His team and him have done 10D ranks, 4C ranks, and on a training trip they managed to complete the A-rank mission of taking down Gato of Gato Incorporated. They're all also qualified bounty hunters. The rest of the Rookie 9 as well as the rest of the room's occupants looked at the members of Team 7 in awe and a bit of fear. Naruto just narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Info like that was kept in the ninja archives in the Hokage's tower. It was also kept under lock and key, made available only by permission of the Hokage himself. Haku Momoichi, Tokubetsu Junin of Konoha. She is the last known holder of Kiri's Hyoten Kekai Genkai and the adopted daughter of Zabuza Momoichi. Her Genjutsu is Chunin, her Taijutsu is Low Junin, and her Ninjutsu is Junin. She's also a qualified Med.Nin and Hunter.Nin as well, joined Konoha's Team 7 in their takeover of Gato Incorporated. Konoha's Genin, Rock Lee, the Green Beast Maida guy is sensei. Neji Hyuga and Tenten Higurashi are his teammates. Because he is apparently physically incapable of using chakra, he has neither nin nor genjutsu. However, he has at least chunin level taijutsu. Mission history isn't particularly noteworthy. As he put away his deck of cards, Kabuto concluded, "This year is pretty unique though, as each of the 5 great villages have put up at least one genin team, even Iowa is here." He then pushed up his glasses and went on, handful of C ranks and a bunch of Ds. The Rookie 9 turned to face the crowd at that point, and Kabuto was correct. Kiri had sent 2 teams, Suna had sent 1, Iwa had sent 1, and Kumo had sent 1 as well. Naruto was unsure whether this was a sign of their true peace or more of a display of strength to try and brag to Konoha, so he chose the latter based on his impressions of the Iwa and Kumo teams. Kusa and Hoshi, 2 smaller villages, are also taking part. However, this Otogakure is also a newcomer. Naruto noticed a glint in his eye as Kabuto said, "I heard they're all rather weak, but I wouldn't worry too much about them." In order to find out who they were aiming for and what they had to do with Kabuto, he stood back to observe the situation and signaled for Ino and Yakumo to follow suit. Before he could wonder what that was about, he felt 3 approaching signatures and noticed from the corner of his eye that they were both waiting for his orders. The former Jinchuriki was paying close attention to Kabuto when the mummy wannabe threw a punch and purposefully missed, and he noticed that he tensed in the same way that someone would if they were expecting pain. What was suspicious, though, was that he tensed after successfully dodging the carelessly thrown punch, and he also noticed that the mummy's teammates nodded at Kabuto almost covertly before the punch was delivered. He motioned for Yakumo and Ino to act because he had seen enough and wanted to issue a warning to Otto, Kabuto, and every other nin in attendance at the same time. The mummy only managed to say, "We're from Otto and we're," before a hand wrapped around his neck and lifted him as if he were weightless. Before he could even realize who had done it, he felt himself being violently slammed into a desk, slightly cracking the wood and taking his breath away. When his teammates tried to assist him, the spiky-haired boy discovered that a crouching Ino had pointed multiple senbon at the underside of his jaw, and the female teammate was immobilized because Yakumo was brandishing a kunai that was pointed straight at her skull. The more seasoned shinobi and kunoichi all tensed and readied themselves for a fight, knowing that when a fight occurred, especially with so many nin from the opposing village in one small room, it was like lighting a match in a room full of sulfur. The entire room watched in awe and fear as the 3 genin had manhandled the Otto nin so quickly that most of them hadn't even seen Team 7 move. There was a puff of smoke at the front of the room before the proverbial match could be lit, and a stern, angry voice called out, "Enough of this. If there is any more fighting, everyone involved will be eliminated from the test." When the smoke cleared, a giant of a man who appeared to be someone you would never want to mess with was revealed. He was surrounded by a number of chunin, which further increased the man's intimidating appearance. "We apologize, Proctor.san," Naruto said as Team 7 turned and bowed together. "As Konoha.nin, you are aware that we do not tolerate anyone hurting our fellows or, worse, betraying us." All the higher.ups knew that Naruto had an empath sense, and if he was hinting that this kid was bad news, he was willing to bet a whole year's salary that he was. Hibiki immediately noticed Naruto's emphasis on the word betrayal and looked at where his eyes were pointed. Hibiki's eyes narrowed as Naruto was staring straight at Kabuto. He had been a little suspicious of the kid because he was still a genin after all these years, but had dismissed it because the child seemed too meek overall. The second part of the test, however, well, many genin did tend to never make it out of there. Of course, calling him out now would do no good and would do more harm than good if he was a spy. Just shut up and sit down, whatever. The Chunin exam's first section has begun. Ibiki Moreno was a very intimidating figure, and all of the participants were quick to obey his commands. However, some of the more seasoned genin were much more afraid because they knew he was the head of the Konoha's T&I department and was also well known throughout the countries for his methods. The lesson of the story was that you did not want to end up on his bad side. Following Ibiki's explanation of the test's guidelines and the distribution of the exams, Naruto discovered the true nature of the test. As a shinobi, gathering information and conducting espionage were two of the most important skills to possess. An ignorant nin was a dead nin. He had never really given up his prankster side, just redirected it elsewhere. Of course, Naruto was still Naruto, and he reasoned that since he would only lose one of his 3 points for getting caught, he might as well put on a show. If he could get away with playing tricks on ninja clans at such a young age, using a variety of intricate traps, just think of what he could do to enemy ninja, using lethal kunai or gas instead of harmless paint. He first looked to see how his teammates were doing because he didn't want anyone else to follow in his footsteps. Yakumo was a little less careful with her method of choice, covering herself in genjutsu before walking straight up to one of the well-hidden chunins and switching papers. Of course, thanks to her kekai genkai, not even Ibiki knew it had happened, and the chunin whose paper she had taken never realized it. Ino was obviously using her family's jutsu and taking the answers straight out of one of the hidden chunin's mind. Seeing his teammates taken care of, he decided to catch up on some rest and promptly fell asleep. Those around him were shocked at the brazen act of defiance and nonchalance with which it was done. Everyone in that room was stressed beyond belief, especially the foreign nin, as they had to do well in order to show off for their respective villages. Ibiki, Ino, and Yakumo thought, typical Naruto. Only the blonde Jinchuriki would have the audacity to nod off during a test that was being watched by high-ranking officials. One of the chunin proctors quickly diverted Ibiki's focus by indicating that a team had been caught 3 times. The scarred instructor threw a kunai with the dexterity and precision of a seasoned junin and yelled, "Strike 3. Get the hell out of my sight, you and your teammates." As more and more teams were eliminated one after the other during the test, the genin's 2 teammates glared angrily at their teammate for sabotaging their chances of becoming chunin so early on. The 2 Hyuga using their Byakugan, really, who doesn't notice veins suddenly bulging out on the side of someone's face? The Inuzuka using his dog partner. A barking dog on top of your head wasn't exactly inconspicuous, and even the Uchiha had been caught, but since they were all genin and neither of them was overtly obvious, they would get away with it. Ibiki made the decision to reveal his final strategy to weed out the weaklings as the exam's time limit was drawing near. You only have 5 minutes left to respond to those questions because the timer is about to go off. I'll ask you the final question at the conclusion of those 5 minutes. Naruto woke up from his spontaneous nap after hearing the announcement, but this was not the case at all. Although it appeared to most that he was napping, a trained eye could see the subtle signs that he was actually doing something else. Many would have missed it at first, including Ibiki, but upon closer inspection, Naruto's breathing was too perfect and rhythmic, and his posture was too rigid to suggest that he was sleeping. Nor was that entirely accurate. In fact, Naruto and his ancestor Yamato had been discussing the arrival of one of Yamato's most dreaded adversaries. Yamato went on to describe what had truly happened to him and the circumstances that had resulted in both his demise and the eventual dissolution of the Namikaze clan. He was terrified to learn that one of the men responsible for his clan's massacre was on his way to Konoha. Yamato had explained that this particular man had no qualms about fighting dirty and would go to any lengths to accomplish his mission. The silver-haired Namikaze knew this all too well, having lost his wife and children to the man. In the end, it had taken the combined might of that man and 2 others to defeat the enraged Jikukan user, but Yamato had left the man and his allies with lifelong scars. Naruto was afraid of what would happen to his loved ones, and he knew that none of them were weaklings, but this man obviously had no problem using hostages or worse to carry out his mission. Naruto sighed, putting it out of his mind because he needed to concentrate on the task at hand and knew he had about a month before the man would arrive in Konoha. The blonde got up from his chair, stretched, and yawned. He approached one of the proctors who was hidden, took their test, crossed out their name, and wrote his own before going back to his seat. The blonde's ability to defy authority and the repercussions of his actions left everyone in the room openly in awe. While the Junin instructor's audience was reacting similarly to their genin, Kakashi was openly laughing loudly at his sensei's son's antics, and Anko had naturally joined the silver-haired Junin in his laughter, barely able to let out the words, "Kakashi, I fucking love your student." "Yes, my dear rival, your student blossoms during the youthful season." Ibiki smirked and said, "Well, Gaki, I gotta say you're either incredibly stupid or have balls made out of brass." Naruto simply shrugged. "But if anyone believes they can get away with that as well, they might as well leave my classroom." Some of the surviving genin openly questioned why the blonde got away with it, even implying that his status as a Konoha genin was the only reason he was permitted to do so. "Quit the fuck up. Gaki got away with it because he was the first to ever attempt that shit," the scarred Junin yelled, adding some chakra to his vocal cords to give his voice more authority. "I'm letting him get away with it because I like his style and it was fucking brilliant, even though no one ever thought of it. Dislike it? Too damn bad. Get used to it, or you'll just be leaving an ugly corpse behind. This is the world of shinobi." Ibiki went on to explain the 10th and last question after realizing that every genin had been appropriately intimidated. Some teams took the easy route out when they learned that failing it would mean they would never be promoted again. Those that stayed were either too obstinate to leave or were too smart to see through Ibiki's bluff, so it was not surprising when they discovered that the question had been the reason they had stayed, and the genin had simply nodded and accepted it. Even with recent advancements, Konoha's academy had attempted to cover up the blood-red realities of the ninja world with rainbow colors. However, deep down, they knew that the academy's flowery facade was a lie, as they were all heirs to prestigious clans, and if the academy wasn't going to teach them certain things, it was up to their clans. Ibiki then went on to explain the purpose of the written itself, proving what many of the remaining genin had already realized. They were shinobi and cheating. In actuality, that was preferable because the clans didn't have to sugarcoat things, and since the majority of the current clan leaders had experienced at least one shinobi world war, they were primary sources. Blood had to be spilled in order for the Hyuga, Inuzuka, and even Nara to become well known during those conflicts. All of them had heard at least rumors about what their parents had done to get there, and it wasn't until recently that they started to see some of that. There were chips in the paint. The darker side of the ninja world had christened individuals like Naruto, Sasuke, and Yakumo at a young age, whether they liked it or not. Naruto's very existence as a Jinchuriki was a testament to the kind of world they truly lived in, a living example of the ambition, greed, and lust for power that fueled their civilization. Itachi had attained the pinnacle of the Sharingan, the Mangekyo, and used it to slaughter the entire Uchiha clan. Sasuke and Yakumo were also aware of this. They had fallen prey to their own Kekkei Genkei, the things that had made their clans notorious and feared. Because Yakumo's abilities were so strong, her mind created a demon to manipulate them, and it was this demon that killed every member of the Kurama clan except for a few. There had never been paint for them or others like them. Instead, there had only been light that glowed brighter and brighter on the bloody portrait that represented the history of their species and their world. A tan ball, however, smashed the window into thousands of pieces as it crashed through, breaking the gloomy and solemn atmosphere. All of the genin in the room were instantly on guard, with the Kumo Nin team even drawing their blades and taking a stance. A purple-haired woman in a tan trench coat stood there, smiling maniacally at the Chunin hopefuls as the ball exploded, releasing a banner that was held to the wall by 4 kunai at each corner. "All right, little bastards, it's time for the Chunin exam's second section." Ibiki said, Anko, you're early, again," from beneath his hand. Almost instantly, a drop of sweat appeared on Anko's head. "Really?" Ibiki merely gave a nod. "Well, I suppose I have time for Dango, don't you think? Training ground 44.5 hours. Anko exclaimed joyfully before turning to face the sweat-dripping genin class. Anko vanished as quickly as she had appeared with a swift shunshin. The blonde-haired Kumo Kunoichi said, "You Konoha nin are so weird," summarizing everyone's thoughts in the room. No shinobi from Konoha could dispute that. A half hour later, we find Team 7 patiently waiting for the Chunin proctor to open the gate in front of them. They had already received their heaven scroll after Anko successfully explained the test's rules while simultaneously frightening the living daylights out of several genin, though that wasn't too difficult when the exam was being held in the Forest of Death. "So, what is the plan, Naruto-kun?" Ino continued to gaze impatiently at the gate that prevented them from entering. She had made significant progress over the previous few months, and now was the moment to demonstrate it by obtaining the rank of Chunin. "We're on our way to the tower. We'll set some traps and wait patiently once we get there." Naruto calmly stated, "By the time any other team gets there, they'll be too exhausted to fight." Naruto had already transitioned into his mission mode, as evidenced by his normally relaxed posture becoming noticeably more rigid and his normally bright blue eyes turning as cold as ice. What if other groups come up with the same concept? From behind her sleeve, Yakumo asked. Take M down quickly and quietly, was her sole response. When they heard crackling, they looked at the speaker above the gate. Then Enko's voice said, Okay, kids, this is it. The Chunin exam's second section starts right now. Team 7 quickly fled as soon as the gate was unlocked, racing to the enormous tower in the middle of the lethal forest. Uzumaki-kun, did you sense that? From her hiding place in a tree's foliage, Yakumo posed the question. Yakumo was talking about the burst of vile chakra felt throughout the forest that they assumed even shinobi outside had felt, and the 3 members of Team 7 were taking it easy because they could easily hide their presence from all but the best of sensors and even most Inuzuka thanks to Yakumo's Kekai Genkai. Yes. Naruto responded calmly, it was much too large to be a typical genin, so it's either one of the Jinchuriki present or something else. One of them? I assumed it was just that Gaara kid from Suna, Ino asked, having been totally ignorant of that fact. Yakumo was equally taken aback by that information. If Naruto served as a gauge for what Jinchuriki were capable of, then they had good reason to be cautious, particularly if there were multiple individuals operating with a license to kill. The council informed me that both Kumo and Taki tried to sneak their Jinchuriki in as a ploy to show off, but Jinchuriki aren't exactly easy to hide, especially with clans like the Hyuga, Inuzuka, and Aburame around. So, what is the information about them? Yakumo inquired. Taki's is one of the more stable Jinchuriki and serves as the Nanabi's container. Although she has some control over its powers, she is not entirely in sync with her tenant. Kumo has 2. One is competing in the tests, and the other is pretending to be a Junin sensei. Naruto explained, never taking his eyes off the direction from which the chakra burst had come. The Junin is the container for the Hachibi and it's rumored that he can achieve a perfect sync with his tenant. The same can be said for the other container who holds the Nibi. Ino said, so if we bump into any of them, before Naruto cut her off. Give them to me. Both Genjutsu and Mind Jutsu are completely useless on Jinchuriki. In fact, if you even try them on one, they could be fatal, Naruto said in a clipped voice. The blonde team leader thought, I shouldn't have any issues with the Ichibi and Nibi, but the Nanabi and Hachibi could cause me some trouble. 4 Jinchuriki running around, 2 of whom are in sync with their Biju and the other is an unstable mass murderer. Let her and the others worry about them, your opponent is that repulsive man, Yamato's baritone voice echoed. Don't worry about them. You forget that Kyuubi is free and the most powerful out of all of them, even when they were much stronger and roamed the lands freely. Since they couldn't afford to take their minds off of anything else right now, especially with all the dangerous factions running around the forest, it would have to wait until they finished this section of the test and had some sort of break. Both girls noticed Naruto's posture become tense and could almost feel the stress flowing from him. A team of 3 other nin set off some of the alarms they had set up to warn them of anyone approaching, as if the kami were listening to their thoughts. A few seconds later, they realized it was one of the Kiri teams, all of whom were wearing breathers. Naturally, these were rather ordinary genin, and Yakumo or Ino could easily defeat them on their own, freeing Naruto to concentrate more on what was going on around them. Yakumo and Ino set off without even needing to say or do anything, with Naruto following behind as backup just in case. Fortunately for them, that wasn't required, and the 2 heiresses easily defeated the genin time and took their scroll, removing any more competitors and guaranteeing them a place in the following test. The 3 genin hurried to the tower to complete the second section of the Chunin exams after obtaining both scrolls. As the Hokage spoke to the genin who had survived the forest, Naruto remained motionless and crossed his arms. Kakashi had congratulated them on being the first team to reach the tower after they had solved the rather easy puzzle at the entrance. The 3 of them enjoyed the break by doing some light training and relaxing in their rooms while they waited for the 5-day limit to expire. The day after they arrived, Kyuubi, Mei, and Hana met up with them. When asked how Mei and Kyuubi had obtained permission to enter the tower and watch the exams, the 2 started suffocating Naruto with their ample bosoms, and the subject was quickly dropped. The Hokage now let a sickly looking Junin take charge and explain that there would be preliminary exams to ensure that only the best would advance to the next round because there were too many genin to compete in the actual final exam. When Kabuto lamely excused himself from the test, every single Konoha Junin narrowed their eyes, having been told of Naruto's suspicion. When the boy was out of the room, the Hokage discreetly signed to have some Anbu tail him just in case. With so many foreign dignitaries attending the finals, it would not do to have any fishy business going. The electronic board on the wall started quickly going through names to determine who would be the first competitors in the preliminary round after that issue was resolved. Naruto raised an eyebrow at Sasuke's obvious twinge when the names ended at Sasuke Uchiha and Yoroi Akato. With Asuma wishing his student well and his teammates nodding at him in faith, the other genin went up the stairs to watch the match from the walkway that encircled the ring. Even though Naruto didn't like the Uchiha, he knew that Sasuke was above average and should have been able to handle someone like Yoroi with ease, but it seemed like every move he made hurt him. The fight started off almost one-sided, with Yoroi leading the match, shocking the majority of the Konoha genin. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto sensed the same gloomy sensation he had experienced in the forest emanating from Sasuke's shoulder. Sending chakra to his eyes, he saw that the source was some kind of seal, and that it could not be good if it radiated that much evil intent. It was also evident that this was the reason for Sasuke's limited movement and incapacity to use chakra. Even so, Sasuke used the techniques Asuma had taught him to win at the last second before Asuma escorted him away. Naruto nodded at Kakashi and the two told Ino and Yakumo they would return before heading out to follow the Sarutobi. Naruto appeared with Kakashi beside him and said, "Leave it to you Sas.Gay to get some kind of dark seal in the form of a hiki on you." Sasuke grunted at the double insult, while Asuma simply arched an eyebrow at their presence in the sealing room. "Why are you two in this place?" Asuma asked. Naruto approached the seated Uchiha and said, "I saw the seal he had on him and being a pretty decent Fuinjutsu user I thought to volunteer my own skills." Then, as Asuma and Kakashi stood back, he knelt down to get a better look at the seal on Sasuke's shoulder. Both had rudimentary knowledge of the art, as Asuma had served in the daimyo's personal shinobi guard and Kakashi had studied under one of the most feared Fuinjutsu users, but they still knew that Naruto, being an Uzumaki and Minato's son, would be much better suited for the job. Sasuke refrained from speaking or asking why the two Junin would let a genin who was only a few years older than him study the seemingly intricate art that was having such a negative impact on him. "So what were you going to do, Asuma?" As he continued to examine the seal, Naruto asked. "I was going to use the Fujihoin, evil sealing method, as that's the only thing we can use on these seals," Asuma replied, lighting up yet another cancer stick. "Wait, so you've seen these before?" Naruto questioned, never once tearing his eyes away from the intricate mark. "We don't have much to work on because there have only been a few instances and the only survivor is Anko. All we know is that they somehow link the victim to the user. In this instance, Orochimaru is the only person we know who can do it, and it seems like he perfected the technique," Kakashi replied. "So that's who I must have felt in the forest," blonde Uzumaki said to herself. In response, Asuma said, "Yup, that's where he got to Sasuke." Well, the Fujihoin would have been effective, but only temporarily. A portion of this seal intensifies the user's negative emotions, and since the Fujihoin depends on the user's mental toughness, it would have ultimately failed and hurt Sasuke more than it would have helped, Naruto explained. "How clever of you, young Uzumaki, or perhaps I should say Namikaze." Even Naruto, who is usually unflappable, became tense at the sound of the voice, which came in a raspy voice that sent chills down the spines of everyone in the room. A pale-faced snake like man with oily long black hair emerged from the shadows, and the people in the room instantly recognized him as the outlaw Sennin Orochimaru. Before anything else could be said, Naruto had drawn his blade and Kakashi had summoned his infamous Reikiri, both of which were racing toward the Sennin from opposite sides in a pincer move. The Sennin was startled by how quickly the two moved and had to retreat back into the shadows to avoid being skewered. Only because of his years of experience was the snake user able to literally slither out of the way before Asuma, with his trench knives coated in wind chakra and ready to puncture an eye, was on him as well. Once more, he was deprived of time to breathe when Naruto yelled from the other side of the room, "Jikuken, Kairhanden, space-time, judgment cut." Orochimaru actually started to panic when purple spheres started to form around his left leg and right arm, making it impossible for him to move them at all. A long, forgotten emotion that cried out that they were now the prey rather than the predator started to resurface inside of him. Fear. Fear of dying. Orochimaru's fear materialized when he experienced an explosion of pain throughout his nervous system, informing him that both of the trapped limbs had been slashed countless times. The pasty-faced man started to melt into the ground before Kakashi could skewer him with his trademark jutsu, his slitted yellow eyes displaying anger and fear. "You are cursed, Uzumaki. I will repay the favor to you, I swear it." Orochimaru said these final words before leaving the area. Asuma turned to Kakashi and Naruto, both still poised to fight, and breathed out a heavy sigh. "What the fuck? You two tried to fight a damn Sannin, do you know that?" While Kakashi ran a trembling hand through his hair, Naruto simply sheathed his sword and went back to studying the shell that shocked Sasuke's cursed seal. Yes, Asuma, we are aware of that, but that's precisely why we had the element of surprise to our advantage. In addition, the three of us could have defeated him, Kakashi said. What on earth do you mean? You and I both have a lot of strength, but Naruto is a genin. A genin who managed to wound and handicap a Sannin, was Naruto's sardonic response. Whether a comrade or not, he didn't like it when people disparaged his abilities. Anyway, what the devil was that? Jikukan, time ninjutsu in space? Still in shock over what had just transpired, Asuma said. One of the many things my father's clan was known for in the beginning, Naruto said. Asuma lit up another cigarette to soothe his raging nerves. Well, fuck this, I need a drink, he said. He knew that the Jinchuriki was strong and that Kakashi had started training again, but he had no idea that the two were truly that strong. Miles away, the heavily bleeding and wounded Sannin came up from the ground, still cursing Naruto and whatever he had done to him. Kakashi had been moving faster than what he believed the pseudo Sharingan user was capable of, and Naruto had been moving at speeds comparable to seasoned Junin. He felt the breath of something on his neck as he tried to stop the bleeding from his torn limbs using what little healing jutsu he knew. He noted the rows of serrated teeth that appeared sharper than most kunai, and he turned to see a creature that resembled a misshapen human with various sharp bones protruding from its body and sickly green eyes boring into his own snake. Like yellow ones. It appears that you had an encounter with that Namikaze. A voice behind the beast said, maybe we could make a deal. When Orochimaru looked up, he saw a man wearing jewelry from head to toe and sporting a hideous-looking scar across his face. Edit. I apologize. In my hurry to get this out to you all, I completely forgot to include the omake. Create, ha 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 ha, was the laughter of a certain Uzumaki who was rolling around on the ground and crying. Observing their son's decision to pass the written portion of the exam, her husband was in a similar state. Oh, he is so your son Kushi-chan, Minato exhaled. He is, damn it, emerged from this uterus. Kushina pointed to her belly and exclaimed with pride. Another red-headed Uzumaki woman with elaborate seals in her hair was sweating nearby. Is this the heir to the Uzumaki name? Haha, Mito.koi, calm down. Her husband, the well-known Hashirama Senju, said, you have to admit, the kid is pretty hilarious. And he does embody that will of fire you were always on about Ni.san, came the voice of Hashirama's younger brother Tobarama. Watching all of this happen were three almost identical triplets. Of course that was to those who didn't know who they were. They were Shinigami, Kami, and Yami. Humans are strange, said Shinigami, a gorgeous woman with gray hair who was almost identical to Kami, the sister's female. Shinigami, on the other hand, wore gray and a slightly more provocative outfit than Kami, who wore white. Says the one who employs them to do her dirty work, Yami said, protruding his tongue in a silly manner. He was on the ground again, gripping his head in agony. Shut up, Yami, Shinigami's short response was. Why are you two treating me so badly? Shinigami and Kami exchanged glances before laughing at their brother's suffering. Yay, that's right, Sochi. Kun kicked that pedophilic snake's ass. Prove to him that young Naruto is willing to fire. You're all idiots.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.